Everyone's looking good.
This damn technology is going to do us old fogies in.
I'm with you.
We were all looking good till Jason clicked on there.
Yep. All right.
Not quite.
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't mean to interrupt everybody.
Go ahead,
I
Pat.
don't mean to interrupt, but you guys are now broadcasting over YouTube.
Well, good. Why does that not look like Paul Sealer?
I don't know. I'll change that. It's Gary Burnett. I don't know why it's doing that.
I can't hear you.
It looks like we have a couple people that have tried to join. Who's the number that ends in 191? Phone number.
Dan Fear, can anybody hear me?
Hi, Dan. How are you, sir?
Thanks. I'm doing well.
Good.
We can't see Dan.
Thank you.
Oh, you look like you need to get a little bit of sun.
All right, Jason, I've now made you the host. You have full control of the meeting.
Hi, Jason.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to get everybody added in here. A phone number that ends in 301.
This is Jamie Wood.
Hi, Jamie. Who are you with?
Comanix asked me to get on. I'm with Hamilton Ranch in Twin Bridges, Montana.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Scott Laird.
Scott.
Hi.
Hey, Kelsey, it's Pat. Hi, don't mean to bother you, but is Missy in today? Okay.
I will pick up Niger seed in when I go tomorrow. I did write down to get a Powerball. If you're going to try to get me a couple of Powerball tickets with no.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being patient and helpful trying to get us all set up here. We're adding everybody in as we can. Right now I've got about 22 people in the meeting, so we're trying to monitor and keep everybody added in, and we'll be going here real shortly.
Thanks, Jason.
This is all new to me. I've never hosted a Zoom meeting before, so I'm learning all this process. So far, I think we did pretty good. Let's see. Carl Zabraki, can you hear us? Are you able to talk if you unpress your mute?
I was getting ready to ask you, Jason, if you had this in college.
Zoom didn't exist when I was in college, so no.
Way before my time.
Carl, can you hear us?
I can.
Good deal. I got you unmuted. Do you want to show your video too? I can try and start that if you want.
You might have to walk me through that.
Well, just a second. Try that.
I ask, who's the Paul Sealer? That's not Paul.
Gary Burnett with Heart of the Rockies. I'm sorry I'm signing in that way. I'm trying to find out why I can't change my name. But
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
I think there's a fair question, Gary.
What's that?
I think that was a fair question.
It was a fair question because he may be retired, but he doesn't look like me. So.
And Gary, your name was changed successfully.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Yep, good job.
I won't misspeak for Paul.
That could be fun.
He's on somewhere. He's trying to join in.
I see him.
It looks like Paul Sealer is here, so.
Looks like he's sitting in the dark. Oh, here he comes.
Just trying to run down my list of PLPW members. It looks like perhaps we're missing Representative Logie and Senator Ankney, and then Mr. Cornwell. Otherwise, I think we're all here. I know Lee said he was going to try and call in. And then Representative Logie said he was going to attend, but I guess I haven't seen him show up. Maybe he can't make today. I don't know. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 5 after 1. Appreciate everybody's time and willingness to modify how we go about doing this business. It's been a learning experience for me, obviously, and a lot of changes for the agency, and I'm sure for you all individually as well. We're going to go ahead and we'll go over kind of the agenda stuff for today. We will hear a presentation from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, as well as some others on wildlife migration and movement topic. I'm sure there's been a few of you that the organizations reached out to talk a little bit about that. And then I wanted to give kind of the rest of today time to talk about what PLPW members are interested in working on from here forward. So similar to tomorrow's meeting, it'll start at 8:30. For those folks that are participating tomorrow, it's at 8:30, not 1 o'clock. Just to make that clear. So tomorrow's at 8:30. Use the same link. Use the same information. I'm trying to monitor 2 or 3 different things at one time, so you'll have to excuse me if I look a little bit dazed. But between Teams and this, and who's got video and who's audio and where we're at, it's just it's a learning experience. So I appreciate everybody's time and willingness to get together today. Like I said, tomorrow will be all about the public access land agreements, and then going over those 27 individual projects that need PLPW review and recommendation. So hopefully you got those documents. If not, let's touch base. I know mine just showed up today, so hopefully if you have everybody with that, I think I'll turn it over to Quentin and Renee, and we can talk about the wildlife migration and movement. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jason. This is Quentin, and I'd like to share the screen, Jason, if I may. I'm gonna try that. That work for you?
Go to the bottom, that little green up arrow. Should be able to share your screen.
Anybody see anything there?
See some elk.
Folks can see that?
Yeah, it looks like elk on the snow.
Okay. All right, thanks. Renee, did you have anything before I started to chime in here?
Nope, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Again, Gwen Kujala, with Fish, Wildlife and Parks here in Helena. Just recently found my way and fortunate to count myself as Chief of Staff, and was asked here today to represent the start of this conversation. We've had some partners, and you see some of them on the call, ask for this topic to be placed on the PLPW agenda. And so thanks for that interest and for everybody's willingness to respond accordingly with this kickoff topic. I'm going to do a real quick overview of this topic. I don't want to take a whole lot of time. Again, there's some partners that want to make some presentation and also talk with PLPW. And so given that, like I say, we'll try to move through this department piece as quickly as I can. And the very first thing I want to do is I want to make sure everybody recognizes that I am least among many on this topic. You see at the bottom of the slide some names of other staff. Renee Lemon, she pulled together this PowerPoint, is with the department's responsive management unit. Justin Goody is the bureau chief for the Wildlife Division Research and Technical Services Bureau. Rick Northrup is the department's bureau chief in the Wildlife Division for Habitat. Catherine Whiteman is also with the Habitat Program and Wildlife. Brian Wakeling is the Wildlife Bureau Chief for Management, and then Ken McDonald is the Division Administrator for the Wildlife Division. And all of those, like I say, have contributed to this effort. And so I want to make sure you all recognize and I give an appropriate nod of recognition to that. And you'll see other staff referenced and involved, not least of which is Dean Walty. This is his photo that we're taking advantage of here of these elk on winter range. And you'll see other credits appropriately assigned as we move through the presentation. Title again of the topic in this presentation, FDP Wildlife Movement and Migration Strategy. Okay, I might need help moving the screen. Or advance, there we go. Thank you. Sorry. So first off, wanted to start and just make sure we're all talking the same, all thinking the same thing. A lot of this information, I suspect, will be a confirmation of things you already know out of your own direct experiences. But when we talk about wildlife movement and migration, of course, we're talking about wildlife moving across the landscape for various life history needs. Elk moving to winter range, bighorn sheep moving to upper elevation summer range, mule deer fawning range, all of that taking advantages of resources to the degree they fit the life need at the time. It also, speaks to population health with respect to gene flow, genetic diversity, population health, dispersal, keeping things at low densities wherever possible across an open landscape. And that's particularly relevant perhaps in today's world where disease has become a bigger and bigger piece of our management considerations, and whatever else we talk about when we talk about disease, there's a wide recognition that higher densities rather than lower densities can exacerbate that situation. And of course, it goes without saying, but we want to say it here, when those things are not in place, when the capacity for wildlife to move across the landscape as they pursue the ends of those needs or the answer to those needs, problems show up. That is a problem. So the task here is not just to recognize wildlife movement and why they do it, what they're looking for when they go from A to B, but how available is the landscape to foster that life history. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has a long history of research, and that continues and it grows. In fact, a lot of our research, as many of you know, and many of you have seen some of the products of that research, are either in summary fashion or as it's implemented, as it's incorporated into management decisions and actions. A lot of that research is directed to ungulates. Here you see some graphic examples of ongoing or recently concluded efforts to pronghorn mule deer and elk. There's also been, efforts to the carnivores represented in the state of Montana. This is a very contemporary slide and very relevant slide. Some of you may have seen this. This is some recent work that models predicted male grizzly bear movement as connectivity is a central piece of the grizzly bear delisting conversation. Specifically right now, and this graphic shows that those corridors that we might anticipate to be used between the Northern Continental Divide population and the Greater Yellowstone population to the south. The blue being higher predicted use. An interesting investigation if any of you want to hear more about how these paths were developed. It really is an interesting manifestation of technology and modeling capacity as that has grown. Both of those have grown over in time. Have grown in time. Another example looks at illustrates a larger landscape. Scale, of course, is something to think about when you're talking about wildlife movement. A lot of our conversations, obviously here in the state, are about movements within the state's boundaries. Not all of them, but most of them. But of course, some species travel across multiple states and across multiple countries. And again, here for sure is another example of how collar technology development has really enhanced our understanding of just what that landscape looks like in the context of wildlife needs and those wildlife, taking action to accommodate those needs, nesting habitat, wintering habitat, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's already, this is not necessarily a new topic. Montana has a long history. All Montanans have a long history of being involved with landscape permeability, which is another way of saying the land being able to host these wildlife movements, whether they're movements within a season or movements across seasons. And of course, in Montana, we have the happy and deliberate circumstance that much of Montana's landscape is open and functional to that point already. Much of our landscape on private lands are private working lands that maintain a host of wildlife numbers and species and a host of wildlife life history needs. And then also, certainly in the western part of the state, public lands, in some cases, their charter is specifically dedicated to wildlife, like for example, the forest unit outside of Helena that is the Elkhorns Wildlife Management Unit of the U.S. Forest Service system. So again, these specific tools that I suspect all of us have seen or heard, perhaps some of us have been directly involved, fall on top of that that open landscape, private and public, by decision, by deliberate action. That's a very fortunate circumstance. So we've got it good, and looking to keep it that way in the context of wildlife viability and their ability to move across the landscape. Just a couple of those you see, fee title acquisition and conservation easements that highlight and formalize keeping those habitats open and available, keeping care of forage vegetation, not just forage, but perhaps timber in the context of security and old growth timber and nesting habitat. You see, and this is something that we'll hear a little bit later on in the presentation, modifying fences, again, making sure that there's no physical barriers to movement, that sort of stuff. So again, a lot of these tools already in play. Montana has already a long history with some of these, successful history, again, on top of that open landscape, open working landscapes already in place. Secretarial Order 3362 came out, and it directed the Department of Interior agencies to work with 11 Western states to conserve winter ranges and migration corridors for pronghorn elk and mule deer. So pretty specific with respect to species and their life habitat needs. In response, an action plan, the state of Montana identified some research needs in these 5 priority areas. Funding also became available, approximately $600,000 for research and mapping, and then over $1 million for projects. And this includes NGOs, partners. So, and as we'll find and hear later today, in this hour, some of those partners are here today to represent themselves and others in that project identification, project prioritization, and implementation. And much of this kicked off with I'll call it a summit, a large gathering of both agency and landowners and NGOs that helped us broadly identify work arenas, and then from there work priorities. I think right now, unless someone can correct me, I think there's projects actually implemented in all except B, the Paradise Valley. I don't believe a project has been implemented there to date. Again, the secretarial order is the latest. In this conversation, I want to see this as the latest emphasis and attention given to keeping wildlife movement viable and available on Montana's landscape. In response to partners looking for how Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, state of Montana through Fish, Wildlife, and Parks would respond, has been the effort to develop a strategy that makes good sense. Three core pieces of the strategy is a vision. First and foremost, maintain that permeable landscape, maintain the landscape's capacity to host wildlife in all of their seasonal needs and life history movements. And of course, on Montana, that means a mixed land ownership. That only leads logically to collaborative efforts, partnerships. We have a long history of knowing that if you don't do it together, as often as not, you don't get it done. And then the other lesson we think we've learned is that, locally led public-private partnerships are another key, if not critical, if not necessary ingredient to work successfully on Montana's landscape in this regard. Here's a photo from Mr. Jason Cool. It's a good one. Thanks, Jason. And the same strategy, there's some actions, and just have identified a fistful of them here just to help you understand in this course scale presentation, what the strategy looks to put in place. And you see, the making sure, running through that list, you see things like making sure the agency is geared up to respond to this prioritization, to take advantage of this opportunity represented by the secretarial order and the interest from NGOs and to the degree they are also interested landowners. Again, this falls to the landscape, and the landowners have to be interested. They have to want to do this if it's going to be successful. You see communications and outreach. You obviously see the need to prioritize and direct efforts and funding. You'd see the idea of being consistent, so that making sure programs speak to programs so that we're not working against ourselves. And also see the deliberate interest in informing land use, hopefully in a proactive fashion. And a great example of that is the recent collaboration that's been formalized between Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the Montana Department of Transportation. As in road planning projects are very expensive. Relatively so, it's easier to incorporate wildlife movement decisions as part of a larger project rather than come along later and try to put a project in place that is just the wildlife piece. And again, there's been some great strides, starting with another summit between Fish, Wildlife, and Parks partners and the Department of Transportation. And of course, finding funding for these efforts, and as always, work with partners, with willing partners to put these things in place, play. Remaining work to be done, and certainly there is that, always that, again, on Montana's mixed land ownership, private land ownership awareness and interest, and hearing their interests, hearing their priorities. They're not just stakeholders here, they're decision makers for those actions that might fall on their land directly or perhaps impact their land use. I mean, there has to be, again, that interest and awareness and willingness there from the beginning, collaboration, good partnership. And again, not just as stakeholders, but as decision makers in the process. And then another piece that's the Secretarial Order has ignited is a lot of interest. NGOs have stepped forward looking for a way that they can help as this reflects their values as well. And at times that interest is large enough where it's become difficult to think about just exactly how to engage all of those interests in a manner that they expect. So those are two pieces at least that remain to be remain wanting for more work and attention. And I think to one degree or another, that's I won't speak for them, but I think perhaps that's one reason some of the partners have come to you here today. So with that, perhaps 2-course scale presentation, I'll stop wanting to hand it over as quickly as I can to the partners and then the follow-up conversation between council members in both presentations. I'll pause here only for questions. I meant this slide only to prompt clarifying questions, thinking that at the end of the partners presentation, there could perhaps be a more contemplative Q&A between council members and either the agency or the partners. And also be advised that for details, you might see me quickly going to Renee Lemon or other staff if there are any clarifying questions. If not, I don't know which partner might want to go first, but Jason, I'll hand the floor back to you.
Thanks, Quentin. Can you go ahead and stop sharing your screen? Thank you. That'll allow other partners to end up sharing their screens. Are there any questions on Quentin's brief overview? Looking not. I guess, Paul, do you want to maybe take the reins next? Or I don't know how you guys have set that up, but I know you've been kind of headed up, so I'll turn it over to you, Paul. Make sure you unmute yourself when you're ready. You had it unmuted and then now we've lost your audio for some reason.
I think this is Scott Laird. Paul was just going to introduce me, Scott
Okay.
Laird. I was the next one on the agenda as we worked it out amongst ourselves. I'm going to just this is Scott Laird. I'm the Montana representative for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And our organization is a member of the coalition that was put together when Secretarial Order 3362 was submitted to the states. Our coalition formed as a result of the symposium that Quentin referred to, the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Migration Symposium that was held in 2018. And there was actually 2 separate meetings a week apart. The first symposium meeting was predominantly between Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and Montana Department of Transportation. And that was a successful one-day meeting. And from that, a statewide steering committee was established with Montana Department of Transportation to address wildlife movement in regard to transportation issues in the state. And then another week passed and there was a second symposium meeting held that was hosted by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and attended by a lot of the conservation groups, NGOs, and some agency personnel. And in that second meeting, we got to look at the strategic plan that was produced by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that had a picture of those 5 focal areas that Quentin showed earlier. And from that second meeting came all kinds of really awesome project work, fencing, weed work, communications with local landowners, et cetera, in each of those focal areas. And then on the side, there was a parallel group that was going to address more of the policy long-term issues with migration conservation. And that's where this coalition was formed. It's a very unique coalition and it's extremely diverse. There's a lot of groups that are members of this coalition around migration that typically don't work together. There was a group of the traditional hunting and fishing groups, such as Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Montana Wildlife Federation, National Wildlife Federation, Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And then there was another sort of group, which I'll call sort of the pure conservation groups, such as the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, Endangered Species Coalition, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation was another one, as well as Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage. All these groups are part of this coalition. And the purpose of the coalition was desiring to work with FWP staff to develop ideas that would take all this awesome collaring data and information and on the ground work that's going on in these focal areas and figure out a way to take all that great work and translate it into long-term guidance for the department so we can address migration and wildlife movement as a part of everyday business. When all this collaring is done, weed work, fencing work is done, how does this type of conservation survive and become day-to-day business with the department? So that's why the coalition was formed. And while we're here today, we were asked by the department, we asked the department, how can we help? Everybody's busy, everybody's plates are full. They wanted to have really hands-on efforts with this long-term approach to migration conservation. And we asked how we could help as a coalition. And two of those ideas were to contact the regions around the state, the Montana administrative regions, of which there's 7, and also submit some ideas to FWP as to how we can sort of institutionalize, if you will, migration conservation with fish, wildlife, and parks. And so a couple of the coalition members, myself and Gary Burnett, who's also on this call, talked to the regional supervisors and their wildlife leads in all 7 regions of fish, wildlife, and parks. And we talked about conservation, we talked about migration and wildlife movement, what's going on in their regions, and any ideas to help instill this type of conservation practice for the long term. We got really good feedback from the regions and their wildlife leads. They're very grateful that we contacted them to bring them up to speed. Some of those regions are very far removed from Helena. And then, meanwhile, the coalition put together some suggestions and submitted them to the department about things to look at to make migration a long-term effort within the department. So we've been working on that for several months. And this is what brings us to this PLPW Council, because we're here today as a coalition because wildlife migration and its private land, public wildlife issues, they fall well under, in our view, the PLPW mission, and we're asking for your help. We believe that this council is the best public body in Montana to hear from landowners and conservationists about the needs and challenges in conserving wildlife migration while keeping landowners whole. So we also have on the call today Cole Mannix, who is representing the landowner on the ground working ranch perspective. And Cole, if you want to pipe in and give your perspective.
Yeah, thanks a bunch, Scott. This is Cole Mannix. As Scott said, my family ranch is in the Helmville area of Western Montana. It's a place Ed Beal's pretty familiar with. Hi, Ed. Ed, you were making fun of me for maybe not getting enough sun. So here I am holed up in the garage. But it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I see that I've got an evil twin, another Cole Mannix, and that I'm grateful for Leo Barthelmess joining us today from up in Malta. And I just see, I think I sent him the link, and that's why he's listed as Cole Mannix as well. And then, so I asked Leo, as I give this presentation, kind of on a landowner perspective, and also Jamie Wood from the Twin Bridges area, rancher at the Hamilton Ranch, to just be on and available as I kind of share a few things about the working lands perspective within this coalition in case you all a little bit later have more questions. But I am here representing Western Landowners Alliance, which was part of that December 2018 meeting that Scott referenced. Western Landowners Alliance is, full of landowners who invest substantially in the inland health and take pride in the wildlife that our lands support. And our mission is to sustain working lands, connected lands, and native species. And yet we also come from a perspective that tends to be clear-eyed and maybe a little bit skeptical about how wildlife conservation efforts can end up impacting landowners. And so we think it's important to be engaged in the discussion. On our Helmville Ranch, for example, elk they can strain our fences, they can strain our range health, they can strain our staff, or just our personnel bandwidth during hunting season for sure. And in the West more broadly, as I said, conservation and wildlife can mean more paperwork for agencies and more restrictions for working lands. And so those are some of the reasons for landowners to look at efforts like this with an eye to risk management. But on the other hand, we enjoy the elk in Helmville. They're part of the reason we love the place, and we think that an intact landscape that benefits agricultural operations and wildlife are really critical. And so if conservation of migrations in the state can mean proactive investment in the health of the land, and if it can mean transparent communication between the agencies and the local people and the collaboratives that are working on the ground, those people that are affected by decisions about wildlife movement, and if it can mean cooperation, then this might work together on migrations could benefit all of us. And so that's the other side of it. In any case, whether you look at it as a potential risk or a real potential benefit, how Montana and the state chooses to handle this is important. And I see it as an opportunity to deepen the discussion of at the nexus of private lands and public wildlife, to go beyond the topic of access and to really ask the question, how can we support landowners and collaboratives who are doing good things for wildlife and who bear some risks in doing that? We've heard from landowners in our work across the state, and other partners have heard from landowners as well, that there are certain ways that we may be able to be helpful with respect to wildlife movement, such as funding needs for retrofitting fences to be wildlife friendly, such as a potential program to mitigate the costs of brucellosis quarantine, which can be which can be significant. And the secretarial order is, an opportunity. It brings resources to the state on this topic. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks received $600,000 over 2 years to research ungulate migrations, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has received private donations that they have then invested in a Western grants program, and the Rancher Stewardship Alliance in Malta that Leo is part of received one of those grants to do wildlife friendly fencing work, and then the Rocky Mountain Front also received a grant to do weed work. And so this brings some significant capacity to do the kind of proactive investment that I think could benefit all of us. And as Scott said, we need PLPW's help, and we think that this is a body that is well suited to explore the issue in the state. Between now, what we're really asking is that between now and PLPW's next meeting in September, we'd like to ask you to explore perspectives of local ranchers, collaboratives, and statewide coalitions, particularly within these 5 focal areas that Quentin had the map of, on migration and how the state handles migration. Specifically, at your fall meeting, we'd like to ask that you consider hosting a panel of representatives from within the communities in those 5 focal areas. And based on that panel, to consider any recommendations for programs, policies, management, or funding that may come to light. And then the final thing I would say is that our coalition has been doing quite a bit of work on this, and we'd like to offer help in conducting that outreach between now and September if we can be helpful. So that's really it from me for the moment. And I think we can, if you all have specific questions about the examples I referenced in Malta or with brucellosis quarantine in Twin Bridges area with Jamie Wood, you're welcome to ask those to them, but I'll pass it on. And thank you for the time.
Thanks, Cole. So I got Leo. I don't think I quite spelled Leo's last name right on his picture there, but there's another Cole Mannix in the meeting. Is that Jamie? I know I have Jamie on as through the phone. Jamie, is that you? Are you the third Cole Mannix?
No, I'm just on the phone.
Okay. Do we know who that third Cole Mannix is?
I love, Cole, that we didn't just have a doppelganger for you, that there were 3 of you.
That's my internet fault.
All right, well, I'm going to try and remove the third Cole Mannix just so we don't get Zoom bombed here by somebody we're not supposed to have on the call. But hopefully that doesn't remove the right person, but we'll go ahead and do that. So good. Cole's still here. That's good. Leo's still here. So that's good. Looks like Jamie's still with us on the phone. So hopefully we didn't screw anything up. But
I'll just.
I didn't know going next step, I guess. Gary and Patricia, are you presenting as well?
I'm not presenting now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Same here. Yeah, just
Okay.
to answer questions.
It looked like, Jamie, did you have something to say?
No, it wasn't me.
Okay.
Okay, so kind of building off that topic, I guess, PLPW members, I'd open it up to thoughts, questions, comments. I guess we hadn't set a date in September yet, but that's probably a good time to look at our next meeting, maybe October or somewhere in there. I don't know what kind of timeline the coalition partners are working on, but that I guess is kind of been the proposal and the request is what role, what if any, does PLPW have with this topic? Is it something that you guys as PLPW members are interested in working on? And from there, if so, what does that look like? And I think the request had been made to potentially do a panel discussion with different landowners impacted across the state. That might be one thing. I guess I'd look to the group to ask any and all questions.
This is Denley. Could I make some statements?
Absolutely, sir.
About 15 years ago in Mineral County, with being on the planning board, we would have assessments that would go to FWP for comments on different subdivisions going through. And one of them was through an elk corridor that was used heavily, and they didn't have any really basis on any of their comments. So some locals got together, like I say, about 15 years ago, and we had ranchers. I worked for MDT as well at that time, and with the private land, we had some planning board members, recreation people, and the local FWP biologist. And we put together a group, and we actually outlined corridors, also using roadkill data and then ground truthing from all the ranchers that had animals through their property. And the idea was for the land use planning, and it was also for the highway department. We had a biologist with the highway department that followed up a little bit on trying to determine where they might think about fencing on future projects. And it turns out our corridor map, we showed it to the commissioners and FWP, that biologist at that time had it, and the highway department, and all of a sudden, people seem to have lost those maps and not thought it was an important thing to follow. And it turns out I just finally, the new biologist in Missoula just got a copy of the maps from me about a year ago. The highway department changed biologist and went in a different direction. But the idea we were trying to do was this planning for the future and the present and the future. And so this isn't a new idea, and I think it's worth pursuing for all of us in each area, because it, like I say, for the land use planning, you can't just always fence out the animals and block them away. They have their corridors they're going to use no matter what. So I think it's worth pursuing more. I'm disappointed that the ball kind of seemed to get dropped about 10 years ago. So that's my statements.
I'll jump in here. One of the things that strikes me in this conversation as Quentin started out and kind of laid this out for us on the council, the fact that we have this issue in Montana is a good thing. You know, we have this abundance of wildlife in the lower 48. As I looked at those maps, we're in a pretty unique position for this whole issue. And then the fact that we have such a diverse land ownership, and each of those aspects a critical combination between private and public lands to be able to host all these various wildlife species that we have here in Montana. And I think one thing that occurs to me initially is, you know, making that connection for the public, to me, jumps out as an important need, because, you know I've seen the migrations from where Cole lives. I mean, they, at a certain point in the winter, they leave and they go to a place where they can winter. Okay. And they have to move a lot to do that, through a lot of fences and a lot of places, a lot of different landowners and other barriers. And I've been in eastern Montana and I've watched those antelope follow the interstate. It looks like a Serengeti migration of antelope. So it occurs to me that to get ahead of this, you know, in the long run, is to have some kind of campaign to make a greater awareness in the minds of all of our people. Now, that certainly it doesn't need to be a place where we start, but it just struck me as one thing that we might have overlooked here. I think, for my 2 cents on the council, I would definitely be interested in us exploring this in the ways that we can help. You know, we've been scratching our heads on all the different issues that we want to improve upon with the landowner, the producer, and the recreationist, and the issues. And if this is one of those issues that we all agree on and that can help everybody involved in this whole discussion, and especially to the greater good for the whole state of Montana, in doing so, it seems like it'd be pretty easy for us to do that. You know, we're going to talk later about the things we want to focus on that we've been working on for a few years. And we've struggled with pinpointing each of those and getting to the meat of it. So I'm intrigued by the idea. It seems to have a lot of value. And I think most of us are all very aware that this is a big issue for the health of wildlife and the impacts on private land and the other barriers, roadways and such throughout the state of Montana. So I would be wondering, you know, if we do choose to go forward, what are the most urgent questions we have to address to be able to be the most successful? You know, whether it's the appropriated money that's going to be out there, how we secure that for our state as promptly as possible so we can address these issues, and then also what funds might be able to be available through, you know, like is the what is it called, the loss reimbursement money through the access program? Is that something that can be used in here too? I don't know. So in general, I think it's a great idea to look at this. I'm not so sure about a September meeting though. That's archery season. Just kidding. So there's my 2 cents.
I got a couple of thoughts I wouldn't mind sharing if I could.
Go ahead, Dale.
Boy, Ed, I really agree with what you had to say. I do think there's certainly an urgency to discuss migrations and migration corridors. I don't know, just probably more because of the short amount of time I've been on this council, how we fit into this. I guess my thought is to have a panel discussion at our September meeting, if that does in fact occur. Seems to be maybe a little bit premature. I guess I would maybe suggest that if we have a September meeting or whatever that next meeting is, that we meet with people like Scott or Cole and just have a discussion about where we need to go rather than jump into a panel discussion. It just seems like I need to have an idea of what our objectives are, what the finish line is for this council. Along with that, with the PALA agreements that we're going to talk about tomorrow, how does this workload, how does it, relate to our other workloads, or the migration, the PALA, and the other work that we have to do? I really see the migration corridor issue as potentially a significant issue, and I think it's a tremendously important issue. And like Ed, I'd be excited to be a part of it, but I also want to know how the department envisions our participation in that affecting other tasks that are given to us. Thanks.
Thanks, Dale. Quentin, do you or Director Williams, do you want to maybe comment on Dale's question about the department envision for PLPW with this topic?
I'll take a first stab, Jason, in response. Again, this is Quentin, and I think, half of the answer, or some piece of the answer, we thought would come out of this discussion. That being said, the piece that, intrigued us when partners came and asked for this presentation in front of PLPW was to recognize that, it is you are a recognized forum. Your conversation, has grappled with big issues, statewide issues. It's a recognized and a respected forum. It's got some great successful history behind it. Recently, some of you council members hosted a landowner panel in in a conversation with a different focus. And that was much received and is still positively talked about. So we did think that it was a good question to ask. You've asked some good questions in reply, Dale. How, if we can all agree that this is an important topic, just exactly how does it measure, in a context of time and capacity against other tasks, some of them assigned, like the required review for recommendations from PLPW on the PALA agreements. And so, the answer that I would offer, again, recognizing that it's an important topic, recognizing that the PLPW forum has engaged successfully on statewide issues, important issues in the past. And perhaps the answer, Dale, is to home in on Ed's comments that, as I understood, really focused on, well, what specific detail within this broader topic could PLPW best throw its attention and weight and credibility to, and its forum discussion capacity to. For example, perhaps it is, having some, as partners here referenced, and the department's presentation talked about making sure we stay well connected locally. Perhaps out of those local conversations will come some key questions of consistency, questions of partnership, questions of, who are in the lead, how do we want to look at these things? And perhaps it's as simple as being a forum for some of those questions for some of those circumstances that have been identified through local discussions to come onto one table with some statewide representation of the issues, and then some statewide, through yourselves, coverage of perspectives that helps, you know, program definition and implementation move forward. You know, and again, that looking as best we can to fit that into your standing agendas, conscious of other things that a September meeting will have to address, or otherwise people want to address. That's an answer I would offer, Dale. Again, in summary, taking advantage of the widely recognized and respected forum that you represent, recognizing that there's other similarly weighted issues on your plate already, and for that reason, being efficient in narrowing in on the priorities and the ways that PLPW could specifically help this wildlife movement and migration topic. And then, you know, in that measuring and balancing, look for your existing agendas to find a way to do that. That would be the answer, Dale. And perhaps I would go a step further. Perhaps, you know, that next conversation, perhaps a panel with landowners represents a place to vet out those priorities, that sharper focus. Perhaps, Dale, the conversation that you described, Dale, is the best way to approach that. As I was sitting here listening to your comments, right now, I'm not sure which is the best option. Maybe a little bit more discussion here today can narrow down which of those two options would best achieve that balance. Attention from your credible venue, but also recognizing the other tasks that are already on the plate. I hope that helps, Dale.
This is Cindy. Hey, I have some questions. Cole, you said that you wanted us to consider hosting a panel considering programs, policies, and what other things?
Well, that was kind of a two-part ask. The first ask was to host the panel and as a forum, basically to do some outreach between now and the next meeting in the communities, you know, with landowners and collaborators that are working on things related to wildlife movement, and to have some discussions between now and then. And that's the part that I mentioned, you know, this coalition could help with. Mm-hmm. And then to take some folks from those discussions, have them participate in a panel before you all. And then, you know, as you consider their input, you know, my question to you was what sorts of things might come to light that could be important. And so I offer a specific example that has some urgency. You know, for example, this is a little bit of a side topic, but for example, I am on the Governor's Grizzly Bear Advisory Council, and there are urgent needs probably in the next legislative session for some funding, both on the prevention side, preventing conflict, and to address what is an increasing need on the compensation side to grizzly bears. And if I just use as an example, I think one of the significant immediate needs in Montana with respect to a lot of ranchers in Southwest Montana, that their operations are significantly under pressure from brucellosis. And for ranches that undergo quarantine, that can mean really significant costs that can jeopardize the operations. And so there may be something that needs to happen in this next legislative session to help with that challenge. It's a specific, you know, it's one of the things I think this council, once they hear from folks on a panel, might grapple with.
Do you have any feel for how those fences near Lincoln are working for migration purposes?
I don't know the answer to that, Cindy. I'd have to ask somebody maybe from FWP would be better at that, or Department of Transportation.
Right. Quentin, do you know?
Cindy, I don't have an answer for that. I'm assuming you're talking about Cole's reference to Department of Transportation fences and movement opportunities across the roadway put in place by Department of Transportation. You know, I don't know how widely we can speak. There's some examples of that, some specific examples of the, you know, the wildlife response to those along 93. A lot of times it's the measurements of success is measured in vehicle collision reductions. It's not always tied to, you know, it's not always paired with, for example, a collaring effort to see if that permeability is still maintained, or if the only metric of success is reduced collisions. And that's not to dismiss that as a successful piece. I mean, there's a health and human safety piece there, but it's a good question, and I don't know just how comprehensively we could answer it. I think I heard someone else chime in, but.
It was me, Quentin, Martha. I think we have, and I might pass the question on to Renee, because Cindy, I have a recollection of at least photographs and documentation of how much wildlife is using those. Are they underpasses there? Renee, do you have more information on that? I think I recall a presentation talking about how successful those are for the moment.
I don't have specific measurements, but we could ask the MDT biologists for that area and certainly get back to you.
I think I must be recalling a meeting in Lincoln that I had where they talked about where they felt it was successful so far. But let's follow up and see what information we can get from MDT.
This is Representative Logie, and the years that I worked for MDT, when they had put that in up Highway 93 north of Missoula and then also south of Missoula, the collision rate went way down. They think it's very successful. They had a lot of pictures. MDT had a lot of pictures of some of the underpasses with animals in them and the variety of animals that used them. And then even without the fencing, if you pay attention on a lot of overpasses and bridges next to rivers, if they put cameras in them, you'll notice that there are some game trails, and the animals are inclined to use any way to get away from traffic if it's handy. So they have been quite successful, and up in Canada, they've even had more success.
I'm all for this migration meeting, hosting a panel. I think it's a great idea.
Thanks all. Ed or Dan, do you have any comments? Ed Bukowski or Dan Fear?
I guess another area I'd be interested in, I always see these high fences down here by the Diamond Ring Ranch along 94. See, that'd be another study area because I assume there were high fences put in there for game damage. I don't know.
Thanks, Ed.
The input for they could have a lot of input for our CWPL.
And another source of information is actually the highway department has a pretty good record of roadkill data that they keep on file. And, you know, I've always thought the offshoot of laying out those migration corridors would be a way to try and pull in insurance companies to try and help get them to pay for some of the fencing that needs to be done. And you have a little bit, you have some fact, a little bit of science behind the high risk areas, and it might be a way to get a little more done too for protection of the animals.
So Jason?
Go ahead, Ed.
Just wanted to kind of reaffirm and clarify with Cole and Scott. So as I understand it, there's already a beginning solid discussion between some NGOs and producers to work collectively together with this right at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ed, that's right.
Yes, there is.
So, I mean, to me, there, sort of the missing link, I do think, is the public, you know, our end of the, you know, bargain here. So, I guess my thought in rehashing this would be, we figure out when our next meeting is, and we consider hosting this ask, and we can sure talk about that a little later. And then once we get to that point, as this gain legs, then we can hand that off to a new entity or a subcommittee within to begin working through it in a real productive way. I think it'd be a shame to lose any momentum that those two, the NGOs and the ag world, might already have begun. If we can bring that together and make it a good solidified effort for our state, I think it'd be a really good thing.
Excuse me. I'd like to comment a little bit. This is Rich. I agree with Ed, and I think being they've already got the process started, we would not want to lose that momentum, as Ed said, because on some of the other issues that are in front of the commission right now, they've stopped and started, the Madison being one, and it's just gotten worse every year. So I think this is something that is important. It's important to have the landowners in, which they have. And so I would be in favor of hosting a meeting moving forward.
Okay, I think that kind of answers that question. Scott or Quentin or Cole, are there other thoughts? And it sounds like we'll get to you guys a next meeting date. Is there a certain time crunch that you guys are under, or timeline that you're under? Like I said, September, we haven't had a meeting typically until after Christmas. I don't know if that puts you too late out or whatnot, but I'm guessing we'll need at least one more meeting between now and next legislative session to shore up some. So just sounds like you've got support from PLPW to at least hold a panel discussion. And so just wondering what that timeline looks like.
This is Scott. I appreciate the council's attention to this and your support of it. We on behalf of the coalition offer support to help round up these folks in the local regions, Leo's group and others, to come to the next meeting. We appreciate it, and we're here to help you.
I might ask, Gary, do you have any sense of timeline or?
I don't think there's any, we don't have any sense of timeline. I think it's up to PLPW. I would say it is, if we can have this discussion before the next session, that'd be helpful to see if there's any action that would help landowners and wildlife movement that might come forward. So I think relative to that, that would be the only timeline.
Justin, I just wonder, just make sure Martha, Renee, Paul, or Ken, Ron, just want to make sure they hear your question as well. Justin, there may be something from their perspective that points to a particular timeline piece that needs to be measured here.
Not that I can think of.
I don't have one. I think we're largely learning and trying to figure out how to support this coalition. So.
Yep. The only thing I might add in that context is, just as we in this case, Fish, Wildlife and Parks and the partners on the phone here today, I appreciated the effort, to get on the same page so everybody was seeing this conversation the same way. It's in, its message and its intent and what the ask was. And in the same vein, I'd suggest that we do that again this time and approach that September or October meeting, whatever it is, with that same kind of common awareness. On our side, that was really helpful for us to do, and would advocate the same again. That'd be my only comment, just to make sure that we, and either through Jason, speaking out of the council members, either through Jason or directly to the partners or to other staff, any other thoughts that you might have about what you are thinking will be at the September, October meeting on that, someplace on that agenda. That would be helpful too, just to make sure we all arrive with the same expectations on September, October.
This is Renee. I just have one more thought. I heard a lot of interest in wildlife and transportation and wildlife moving across highways. And so as we're thinking about this next meeting, I think there's a role for MDT to play if that issue is gonna keep coming up.
I think it's a good idea, Renee, and I believe you're part of the planning and implementation team for the statewide steering committee. And it'd be great because there is two major pieces to this. One is the transportation piece and the other is the on the ground and sort of long-term guidance piece. And I think it'd be helpful for the council to hear from either the steering committee or the implementation team.
And one last thing for me, if there's any 1,000-pound gorillas in here, it'd be nice to know what they are up front from each perspective. So we can win, get this thing positive.
I appreciate that. It's always, Ed, I appreciate that. It's always good to ask about the gorillas in the room. You know, I don't know. I don't think I see any. I mean, I think the task is to, how to figure out how to do this well. Lots of interest has been generated. There's a lot of history that's already in place on Montana's landscape, as you reiterated, Ed, a lot of momentum. And so if it's anything for me, it's just, working together is what we know leads to success. So just working hard to stay together. And that's why I made my comment about expectations. Do what we can to, as we approach things like an agenda or a next meeting, we all are very clear about what that's going to be, what the specific question or ask is going to be. And that's not a gorilla, Ed. That's just, I appreciate the question, and your question prompted me to think that's my response. It's just staying together, we know, is what works. And so let's stay together here.
I guess one of them, when Denley was talking about the issues they tackled like with subdivisions, and when you look at transitions with private properties today, right now, that might be a 1,000-pound gorilla. I don't know. So I don't know exactly who you bring into that part of the discussion. Maybe that comes a little bit later, but I think there's a lot of historic understanding in this discussion right now that is lost on things that change quickly right now too, as far as entities coming in and changing the mix. So that, I don't know what else it would be either, Quentin. Maybe that.
This is the other Ed. This is the other Ed speaking, and one of the things that you're talking about might be a gorilla in the room is being on the elk cattle brucellosis committee. There's some major big fences being put up down there and around the Dillon area, and like I said, it's private property there. It's definitely restricting.
Ed, it seems to me
You're off, Martha.
We lost you, Martha.
Sorry about that. One of the benefits I think of having the panel discussion is using the panel to bring to light those the tricky issues that we all might not know. What are they from the different perspectives, so we know how to either address them or navigate around them.
Yeah.
And I have to say, back when we did have our discussions in the county, that what Ed Beal was saying is true. It was the developers that had skepticism saying, are you trying to stop development? And I think part of that can be handled with an education process, and the more diverse people that are involved, they can say, this isn't to stop development. This is to help our resource in Montana, throughout Montana.
As I visualize those corridors that Quentin presented, and you look at those corridors coming down into Wyoming from Alaska, I think the bald eagle is the longest corridor. Then you can kind of put that together and go, anybody involved with lands in those areas might need to know what's going on, what's important, what's critical for the future for Montana to have what it has in regards to natural resources. And I don't know, I've never really seen it quite like that. I mean, in my head, I know it's there, but when you see a map and look at that connectivity, pretty interesting. And I think we all love that from each aspect that we come at this thing. And yet we do have to mitigate all the challenges that I guess the blessing of living in a place that has so many resources, we still have to understand how to mitigate those challenges as best as we can. So I think it's kind of exciting.
I agree 100%. And another thing that you might look into is the fact I know Wyoming a while back had some major migration conflicts with antelope, and I don't know exactly what they did to mitigate it, but like I said, I know they came up with something with fencing and things like that.
This is Cole Mannix again. I just wanted to respond, Ed Beal, to what you had said about 1,000-pound gorillas, and it's why I think we're bringing this topic to the council. Is that when the Secretarial Order came out, one of the things that happened is that the National Cattlemen's Beef Association got together at their annual meeting and to talk about corridors as this big national issue. And it really created, my point is that it created a big buzz, like what is this about? And other states' actions on migration corridors the same way. It creates, as Leo and Jamie know, a buzz in the landowner community, as many of you know. And just people want to know what it's all about. And that's why I think FWP's approach to this to date has been great. It's been patient, really talking to partners. And then it's why I think that conducting some outreach in local communities between now and whenever the next meeting is, and really hearing from people what they think about how to approach migrations moving forward diffuses some of that, because it gives people input and they're part of the conversation. So that could be a 1,000-pound gorilla, but I think managing it this way will diffuse that. I don't know if Leo or Jamie, you want to share any more, but.
So just to follow up on that, the education and what Cole was talking about, last fall, I got a call from one of the larger landowners up in my area, and BLM had went in and removed the bottom wire off a fence. And the first thing that came to his mind was migration corridors. Are they taking my fence down or not? And, we'd had some conversations with BLM then through a couple other boards that I sit on, and that was not the case. So education is a big issue, I think, so that landowners know what we're doing or what we're looking at. And also, as I stated earlier, I think we've got a little momentum. We need to keep it going. Land ownership changes. And as new landowners come in, sometimes they're not very easy to work with. I know visiting with a local real estate attorney, he said it's getting almost impossible to sell some lands to out-of-staters if it has pipelines across it, old dumps from the homesteaders. It's right in the contracts. They have to go clean all those up or they won't buy it. So I think the quicker we move, the better, but we have to have education because like I mentioned, the landowner, that was the first thing that came to his mind. And the fences have to be able to keep the cattle in. This one still was able to, but nobody had talked to him. They just went up and did it. And that creates quite a little angst in a lot of landowners' minds.
This is Dan. And do you think we should have county people involved, various counties that do land planning?
Well, Scott or Quentin or one of you guys want to speak to that?
We hadn't, this is Scott, we hadn't discussed county commission involvement to this point. Something we can talk about. Our main incentive here is to get local input from the folks in the focal areas, the working lands, and make this a a bottom-up process. And I think we hadn't discussed county commission involvement. Perhaps some of the commissioners or landowners on the working groups.
It makes sense to me, and a lot of the commissioners are involved in the collaboratives already. Yeah, so it makes sense to me to include that.
I'd agree with Cole, and that this is good. This is a good piece of discussion prompted by Ed's question. Yeah, so maybe we're speaking very deliberately here, very directly to the functionality of PLPW's, thoughtful engagement here, and that is to help us to stay on a good course here. We know it sounds like across the assembly here today in this conversation, probably all of us can reach in and pull some example about how not to do it well, it being a collaboration of any sorts. So in that context, maybe there is, not to make a decision here today, but maybe there is a look to a county government representation in that panel. Maybe there is a look to a county planning or a land use planning perspective in that panel. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And what I think I heard Cole say is that some of those perspectives are already included, and there may be some individuals out there that represent 2 or 3 perspectives in a panel that helps illuminate a potential gorilla so that all parties, including the venue of PLPW, can steer away from that or paint a way to manage that, as Cole said.
Quentin, I got a question for you. It's off subject. How do I get back to mute?
I can meet you. I can meet you, Ed.
Oh, Jason just took care of you, Ed.
Yep, you're back on mute. It looks like the potential next meeting dates would be probably like the dead week. So maybe like October 19 and 20. Does that seem to fall within your guys' purview? I don't know if we need to take the time to do all that now, but that would be the week where overlap between archery and rifle. And that just seems to make sense to me, I guess, if it's not too late. Somewhere in that time frame. Okay. Well, we'll look to it. Go ahead, Quinn.
Jason and Cole and Scott and Gary and Logie and Jason, I mentioned you there. Just I'm talking to the panel, to the council. I wonder if there's room in process here, in an agenda developing process, if perhaps the agency and the Gary and Scott and Cole and company can sit down and flesh out a little bit what that piece of the agenda would look like in greater detail, just taking this discussion and get that to you, Jason, to vet with the panel, just to make sure that when we show up, when this topic shows up in October, everybody says, yeah, that's what we're expecting and that's what we'd like to do. And that being not just a notice from Scott and others and FWP, but being a draft suggestion that, hey, on further reflection and visiting, we think this is what that October discussion topic might look like. Is there process room to do that? Is there tolerance to do that? I asked that not just of the council, but also of the other partners here today in the conversation.
I know members of the coalition be happy to help flesh things out.
Absolutely.
Okay. With that, I thank you guys all for your time. And go ahead, Ed. One more question.
I just was curious if either Leo or Jamie had any final comments on our discussion to throw in.
This is Jamie. From a producer standpoint, I do feel that we definitely want to see wildlife making that move, but and using those corridors. But it feels like we should have, it should start from the ground up, and producers should have a chance to get their voices heard. And 'cause I think that most people want to help the wildlife, and it benefits us and our livelihood too.
This is Leo. I would agree with what Jamie said, and thank you, Cole, for outlining a very, well-spoken position for the landowners.
Thank you.
Hey, Jason, this is Renee. I have an update from Joe Wiegand, who's the MDT biologist.
Okay.
I can answer the question about the underpasses east of Lincoln.
Sure.
They've been very successful. White-tailed deer and elk use them regularly. Other species that have used them include bighorn sheep, moose, black bear, grizzly bear, wolves, mountain lion, sandhill crane, a bobcat, and a number of small mammals.
Good to know, Renee. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I saw Carl speaking, but he was on mute, and I wondered if he was trying to ask a question.
Mr. Zabraki? There you go. Oh, still muted, Carl.
Okay, how about now?
Perfect.
My only thing is, it's interesting to sit here and listen to everyone, and I think we all have the same. We all want to keep Montana the last best place, have our wildlife and everything, and it seems like we have so many recipes to make the same pie. And maybe if we get together and have some discussions, we can flesh out our recipes so we're not all trying to go in different directions. If that makes any sense to anyone.
It does.
Yep, I agree, Carl. Thank you.
I would have one last question, Jason, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And that is, we're talking with PAL where we're giving payments for access. Has there been any discussion in these different sessions about possible compensation for some of the landowners to get involved more with the corridors? Because if you're going to be channeling more wildlife over the properties, there's going to be more damages. And I'm just curious if there's been any discussion along those lines.
Yeah, Rich, there has been a lot of discussions about how to target, for example, NRCS program dollars that may be available broadly, but how to target those to high usage areas by wildlife movement. Is it something that the state, I'm going to butcher the name of this, but the technical committee between NRCS and all the agencies that participate in setting sort of wildlife needs and priorities. If migrations or wildlife movements is one of those that can help target resources. And so that has been part of the discussions. Patricia, you, Gary, others may want to add something to that.
I'd just say I think we are interested in that. We're really coming at it from the private land perspective and wildlife movement across private land. So we recognize the impacts of that and the opportunities with that. So we're looking at other opportunities for conflict reduction with Natural Resource Conservation Service. Fence is a practice already, but some of the other pieces are not. So I certainly think we're more than interested. And I just want to reiterate and agree with Quentin's proposal that this is a collaborative process, and we're interested in bringing the conversation back to the council that you want to hear from a landowner and wildlife perspective. So the transportation piece we knew might come up, so we'll look at that, and we'll be interactive with this whole group in terms of developing that agenda for the panel.
And just for the funding piece, I mean, we are looking at some funding mechanisms, at a national level, where and how that might be put on the ground is yet to be determined. It is a very much a bottom-up approach, listening to what landowners' needs really, what they really are on the ground. And then from there, trying to figure out, Cole mentioned NRCS dollars. Can some of the secretarial order funding help with landowners on the ground. It's, you know, getting creative and seeing what might exist is always part of the conversation.
The big thing is, you know, just how can we, I think in response, Rich, is, you know, how can we make wildlife movement, or if you're in a high wildlife movement area, how can we make that good news if you're a landowner rather than a negative? I mean, that's the, you know, that's, I think, the goal.
Thank you.
I just have one more question. We're talking about, kind of talking about some compensation for the migration. Is part of the discussion how to get them to migrate? Now that some of the areas, they're not in their historical migration pattern?
Cindy, I'd offer an answer and would look for someone to fill in. You know, that I would only say here, thinking on my feet, that you know, with an eye to local conversations and making sure we stay connected with those sorts of details at a local scale as they're recognized and prioritized by those persons. Circumstantially, case by case, that might be something that's identified in a particular place. And certainly we have some research that talks about, you know, lost migrations, populations that migrate now less than they used to. So I don't know if that would come out to be a priority, but it does seem that a process like this that focuses first on the ground, keeping our eyes open, that might be what the ground identifies as a priority.
One of the things that has come up at some of the meetings that I've been a part of, Cindy, is, you know, just for lands that are already available to wildlife, habitat improvement projects. And that might mean timber management, or it might mean weeds. And if you can, you know, improve habitat, you may be able to distribute them a little bit more evenly. Certainly some landowners feel that, you know, the behavior patterns have changed a little bit over time, and as they become used to irrigated, you know, alfalfa fields and that sort of thing. And so habitat improvement might, you know, make more of the landscape available to them again.
This is Scott. One thing I might say is that's part of the beauty of this momentum that we have, is that FWP right now has a whole lot of collars on the ground all over the state. And we're going to see this influx of new data. And there's, you know, they've been collaring wildlife for many, many years, but the technology is so good now. We're going to be seeing specifics that we haven't seen before, and we're going to have this huge dump of new information that is really going to be great. And that's why we want to get our hands, another reason to get your hands around this stuff, because now we have good information coming in that's new. And that could draw a little bit different picture.
All right, I think we'll cut it there. Again, I appreciate all your guys' attentiveness and your willingness to talk about this issue. I think it's a very valuable issue to everybody in Montana, whether you're a producer, landowner, recreational user, or none of the above. I think it's an important issue, and we look forward to see what we can develop out of a possible panel coming up likely in October. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for the discussion. Much appreciated.
Panel members, and for those that are interested, let's take a 15-minute break. So it'll be 2:45. We'll get back together here using this. You can leave your computer open or on. Just go ahead and mute yourself so you don't have any odd noises you don't want to display all over the internet. So
Jason, if I may.
Thanks,
make a
Cole.
comment
Thanks,
first.
Gary.
I just learned this shortly, and most of you probably already know it. But if you leave your computer on mute and then wish to speak, if you hold the space bar down, it unmutes you while you're holding your space bar down. And for some of us that have trouble getting back on and unmuting and muting again, that works a whole lot easier.
Thank you, Commissioner Stuker. I didn't know that. We'll be back here in 15 minutes. Thank you all.
I'll handle it.
Hi, Commissioner Stuker. How have you been?
Very good. And yourself?
Good.
Good. We're getting all kinds of moisture up here, so it's as green as I've ever seen it this time of the year, so I can't complain. I'm not getting my haying done, but it'll dry out soon.
That's great to hear. Not about not getting the haying done, but about it being moist. Because I saw the drought advisory map, I think last week, and I was surprised at the certain spots in northern Montana and southwest Montana that are really dry, because everywhere else looks the same, looks really moist. So
Yeah, no, I was kind of surprised when I looked at that map too, because some of the areas, depending upon when the map came out, a month ago, we were extremely dry. But since then, we've really improved. And I
Great.
don't know if the map actually reflected that for our area, so. But
let's hope that was the case.
yeah.
All right, it is 2:45. It looks like we've got most everybody back. I think Dan looks like Dan is still with us on the phone, and
Yes.
okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. So we have 8. Again, Mr. Cornwell would be 9, and then Senator Ankeny would be 10. So we're all here. So I wanted to take a couple minutes to give Director Williams a chance to comment and participate. Thanks, Martha, for joining in. I know you're swamped with WAFWA and everything else, so thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks. Just a quick hello to all of you, and thank you for your perseverance and persistence and still figuring out how to get together and meet and do good work, just doing it on Zoom instead of in person. So thank you for that. I would like to just say a couple of things or talk about 2 issues. One is how COVID has impacted us in our operations as an agency. I mean, I think by and large, it hasn't stopped our work, and people have been really productive in getting a lot done. I think it's allowed us to learn how well we can work remotely and not necessarily have to have everyone in the office, but it certainly has been a big impact, and we really are seeing an increase in pressure, increased visitation, really across the board. So it's been interesting, and I have to say also, sadly, I think in the last week, really, we now do have some employees who have tested positive. And so now we're really going through that learning experience of who has to quarantine, how do we do that, and how it affects our workforce. So we're thinking through all of that as well. But just to know, we're working hard, but it is definitely changing how we meet and how we travel and get out. And I feel like I haven't been getting out nearly enough because of it. I miss that. The summers when I, in years past, have gotten to every region. And that's not the case yet this summer. So the other piece is thank you for listening to the migration presentation. I think to be fair, it's been hard to find the right forum for that. And so I really appreciate your willingness to listen and potentially take on what you can of that. We've thought through it, and I would just want to add to carefully is as we address migration in Montana, really wildlife movement, we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that works for Montana, not necessarily just the same way that Wyoming has done it or other states that you help us find a way that works for sportsmen, wildlife, landowners, works for all of us here. And it might not just look the same as it does other places, or there might be similarities where we can pick and choose. So I really appreciate your receptivity to it. There was a piece of me that was a little protective of you and your time and effort and space to take on new issues. And I had hoped to, this really goes to one of your comments, Dale. I think I had hoped that we could all get to the issue of how do we better support landowners who provide public access, or learn more about what are incentives other than or in addition to block management, or now the PAL Act, whether it's increased technicians, helping people sign up more. I hope to get to that, but I now feel really comfortable with you tackling the wildlife movement issue and learning more of what we can do there. So at first I was, one, protective of you, and two, had things that we had really wanted you to get to. But I think this is healthy, and am excited to see how it comes out. So that's really all I have. I just want to say thank you, and I'll be on until 4 o'clock. This week is the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting, and it's been a surprisingly really productive through Zoom. I feel like we've actually gotten through a lot more work than we have in other times, have had some challenging conversations that have been good. And then tonight, the reason why I'm getting off at 4, I guess tonight doesn't count as 4, one of our staff is getting the Professional of the Year award. I haven't let all of our staff know. I wanted her to get the award first, but that's a really big deal. We haven't, I don't know that we've, a Fish, Wildlife, and Park staff person has gotten that award, certainly not in the recent past. So anyway, that's exciting news there. That's all I have. And I'm happy to see your shiny faces, smiling faces, not shiny.
Thanks, Mark.
If you guys have anything for me.
Yep, that's what I was just going to put up
thanks.
to the group. So
That's probably shiny foreheads, not shiny faces.
Yeah, that was a Freudian slip. I guess you see Quentin's shiny face or forehead. No, his smiling face you don't see him on, but that's certainly an addition since our last meeting, and it's really, I'm so excited to have him in the director's office. He's been, as you can see right off the bat, a real asset.
any other thoughts or comments for Martha or Quentin? I see Ken is on as well. So, and then Ron Gendro, our legislative liaison, he's met last meeting in person. He took over this year as that role. So.
I got a comment for you, Martha.
Yes, Ed.
So you're going to have a lot of PR money in the future.
Yeah, I hear.
And a lot of JD money.
Oh, DJ, really?
We were on a Zoom call with Pure Fishing. So it's a corporation that owns all the good brands in the fishing world. And right now they're pushing 60 days out on redeliveries. And their estimate through their work is that there will be 10 million new fisher persons in the United States when this is all said and done, at least for a year. So I think that's great for fishing because it had been suffering across the country. So pretty amazing numbers. And we've sure seen it here in Montana. A lot more activity with fishing. Kind of nice. One other thing I'd say, as you go through the whole COVID thing on your department, as you get to the end of this, whenever that will come, we've seen, and I won't mention the agency, but we we do some other licenses and permits with a federal agency, and they've cut those off because they don't have folks in their staff, but they don't do them online. And we've had a lot of customers who are very disappointed, and I haven't been able to get them to come back on with just allowing us to distribute them. So as you go, I don't know if those will apply particularly to FWP, but as you go back at some point in time and look at what's changed, just maybe with those lenses, to make sure that you don't lose anything in the transition, even though, like you mentioned about the Zoom meeting, I think we're figuring out how to do Zoom meetings pretty well. I've done a lot of them myself, although most of them are an hour. So, 2 cents.
Thank you, Ed. I had heard, I think, word of mouth, maybe even from you, that PR is up, is certainly spiking. I think that's great. One of the things you know better than I do is just how volatile PR is. So I think it's great, but what we've learned is not to build our programs or staffing around PR, but try to ask for those one-time only requests and really fill in some long-term needs. I'm really glad to hear you say that DJ Dingle Johnson is up, because that's where I think we've really been hurting. One of the pieces that just came out in the directors meeting for the Western Association is the other states had reported a really big increase during COVID in fishing licenses, way more than hunting licenses. I had not yet heard the same for us. So I'm really glad to hear you say that you have seen a lot of activity there. That's great.
Yeah, it's
So,
embarrassing to look at it's embarrassing to look at our pegs on the shelves in the fishing tackle department, because they're about half empty.
Wow.
And it's just demand. I mean, we've been, everybody says, what do I need to fish with? Well, fish will bite on any of those pieces of tackle, but now stuff that hasn't sold for 5 years is gone. So I think that's going to be a really good thing for conservation with that money coming there. And the PR money, if we're in any indication, it will be substantially more than the peaks in the past. You're right, it's always short-lived and very volatile, but this is not anywhere near from over in those supplies and demands. And it's actually very disconcerting for us as we head towards fall with, say, hunting ammunition and just standard hunting equipment. So we're really concerned because all the major manufacturers are way, way, way behind. And it's going to be a challenge on our end. So very good, but it's going to be a challenge for the average outdoors person wanting a box of 30-06 come some point in the fall.
So what you're saying is instead of hoarding toilet paper, we should maybe be hoarding ammunition.
No, I'm not saying hoarding. I don't want to say that, but something along that line. Yeah.
Oh. Wow, that's interesting. One other piece when you talk about, Ed, the need to have licenses available online in case we have to shut our offices again, which I don't anticipate, but it's always good to be planning. We will have our new website up and running by the fall. It's been so antiquated and not coordinated between parks and fish and wildlife. So I'm excited to finally, it's been a big push to get that going. And it's really a precursor then to our new Explore MT, which is now we're kind of piecing out, and it's going to take a while as expected, but at least we're starting to tackle that. So I hope, and I think I hope someone reached out to you, but we can talk offline about that. It is exciting though, just to get the new website moving, and I hope you'll see an improvement just where it's easier to use. It won't just look better, but the point is to make it easier to use. So it's good to hear.
Any other comments or thoughts for Director Williams?
Well,
Okay.
thank you
Thank
and
you.
keep it up.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you for your time, and you're certainly welcome to come back tomorrow if time allows for PALA discussion. So
I have it. I'm certainly going to try to.
sounds great. Thank you. And chime in time too.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So the next kind of agenda topic or item, I guess, that I'd thrown out there was this continuation of trying to revisit stuff from last meeting, from the meeting before that in January. So the meeting in January, we had one in March, which seems almost a year ago now, but we had those 2 meetings. And then we had some discussion from your guys's previous involvement in. And so what I wanted to do is kind of revisit some of those topics, kind of get a game plan for going forward on some of those topics. There's some legislative stuff. There's some just general initiatives. There's just a variety of different things. And so recognizing your commitment to not only these topics or whatever topics you guys want to address, but also recognizing there's this PALA requirement. The PALA stuff, like I said, we'll address tomorrow. We'll start at 8:30. The meeting invite you may have gotten said, I think 8 o'clock, but it's going to be 8:30 tomorrow morning. We'll run for about 4 hours tomorrow, or 3.5 hours. And then we will wrap up from there. But just recognizing again, there's another new topic before you today about the migration corridors. I don't know that initially that'll be a very big lift, but it will be down the road potentially more involved, either for this committee or like Ed said, perhaps a subcommittee of some sort. So I just wanted to open it up to kind of revisit some issues or topics that you guys want to focus on here as we wrap up the year, and particularly probably looking at legislative issues that maybe need to happen. The last time we had legislative issues or changes, we went through the EQC. Representative Logie helped work that process, and it worked pretty well, I think, to get, in the end of the day, to get stuff through. I don't know what EQC's timeline looks like. Maybe Ken or Representative Logie can, or even Ron can chime in on that if we were to kind of draft something for them to review again, like we did last time. It seemed to work well. But again, just wanted to open it up for at least the next hour or so to talk about issues and things that you guys want to really push forward and how we prioritize that. So.
Well, I have some thoughts, Jason, that I've jotted down over the last couple of days. I know tomorrow our discussion's on PALA, and I think as we get into that, as I reviewed the applications and the worksheets that were submitted, there were some things that, as I read some of the submittals, I thought, boy, we need to take another look at some of this stuff. And I think that's going to be important as we go forward. And I felt like when we looked at this at the last couple of meetings, really the last meeting, then today, there was an urgency to move forward on it. But after we've worked through one generation of it, I certainly have some concerns. It'll be interesting to hear what the other council members have tomorrow, as well as some of the regions in terms of their thoughts on it. And but I'm just thinking at one of our next meetings, we need to probably take another look at that and maybe identify some of those concerns that we have, and maybe find a way to work through some of those. And again, I'm just guessing there'll be others that also have some concerns there. You mentioned just a moment ago about migration corridors, and potentially having this discussion, this panel discussion next month. And you just said you didn't know, it didn't sound like there'd be a lot of involvement from the council at the next meeting. I think it's going to be important to know where we need to go with this, what the expectations are, and I do see this as potentially it could be a fairly big workload. It's so important. There's so many facets to it. I know a lot of people want to focus on the transportation end of it, and that's important, but so are the genetic parts of it, just the loss of historic routes, and you know, it could really become a much bigger fish than we expected. But again, that's something we need to talk about in the future. And then in the last, we talked about continuing having an update on the elk management plan. I certainly would encourage you to do that, to have the young lady come in and visit with us. The other thing, this would be just a quickie, but I know Brian Wakeling was hired as the new Wildlife Bureau Chief, and I may not have his title correct, but it'd be great if he could be at one of our meetings or come on the Zoom meeting, just so the council members could get to see who he is and just visit with him for just a minute. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Ken or Quentin or perhaps Director Williams, I know we had started the elk management planning process. Can you guys provide an update as to where that citizens advisory group was at and where we're at with that?
I see Quentin's conveniently on mute. You're just off mute, and yay, you're looking instead of seeing your mouse pad. We've been working closely. I've been working with Lindsay, and boy, she's so great. She's done such a good job already. I'm not sure the very latest, Quentin, maybe you are the person on where those letters are. I think we're really close.
Yeah, we are. I mean, last I touched bases with Lindsay or saw communication from her, she was starting down the path of, reaching out to folks, confirming who was or wasn't. And I'd ask for tolerance from the council here. That's not everybody, I think, knows everything with respect to those applicants that put in. We'd like to make sure that they all know, for want of a better way to put it, who's on and who's not. And so hopefully it's enough just to say we're at that point in process where soon, that list will be widely known to everybody. And then we did end up canceling for the time, our process time we've taken, we postponed the first two meeting dates that we identified in the call for interest, and made the decision to, once we confirm who all have been put on that group, we'll work with them to identify a first meeting date. So hopefully we can keep it just out of respect for Lindsay's outreach to those individuals that have put in, whether they're going to be on the group or not. We could respect that and just treat that as an update to the point in process.
And I think, Quentin, that helps. I think now I'm looking at my schedule. I think we have some phone calls scheduled even later this week so that Lindsay and I can talk to the people who applied, especially those who will hopefully be on the council, to clarify the really limited role of this first step of the council, and also to make sure that the members can think independently and aren't coming to the council representing a certain group, but are representing a perspective. So it'll be great to get going, and it's too bad we had to postpone for a little bit this meeting, but I think we'll get back on track.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that's I wanted to answer that point to your question, Dale, and then also the PALA piece as well, or the PALA, or whatever we call it, public access land agreement. I think there's some revisiting to that program perhaps for next meeting as well. As we roll into the kind of the next year of agreements, or look at the next year of agreements, if what we need to do, or if we need to do anything, how that looks. I think that's important to probably address. I know when you were mentioning those comments, I saw a few other heads shaking as well, so that's good to know. Other thoughts or immediate things you're looking at wanting to work on right away?
Hey, Jason, just let me jump in real quick. So EQC has 2 more meetings left before legislative session, and that's July 29th and 30th. And that agenda is already filled. The next one is September 9th and 10th. So if this group wants to put anything in front of the EQC, it would have to be before that. You have to be that September 9th, 10th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
That's good timing, Ron, and that I was going to talk to Joel. I know Quentin's been working with the EQC staff, that any legislative proposals we might bring in as the agency are hoping to present at the September meeting, not the August meeting. Or July meeting, sorry, the July, not the July, but yes, and yes, the September.
Yeah, that's good. I know, like I said, last time we had a few of those bills that we had run through either at the request of the department, or we've done them independently too. I know Representative Logie had a few placeholders in there last session for us also. So, other thoughts?
I'll go.
All right, go ahead, Ed.
So going back to, I think it was 16 when we had our landowner meeting, I feel like we haven't really addressed much of those issues. You know, we tossed around the discussion of trespass and consequences. This is from the December meeting of 18. But trespass and consequences, hunter behavior, to me, those were the top 2. Down the line, we also talked about the 100-day payment system. Somehow, I still believe in, when we look at those PALA agreements and those PALA propositions, there's still issues with gates and roads and hunter behavior. You know, it wasn't predominant, but it's still there. And I think one of the things landowners clearly are looking from us is how to address hunter behavior. We've talked with One Montana in the Master Hunter Program. You know, this year, all of our hunter education has been online. So the materials that are developed or presented, I don't think there's a great personal impression that's made through the Calcamy Hunter Ed program. Not knocking, it's just a statement of fact. So I think we really still need to come up with a solid way to improve hunter awareness about hunter behavior. And as you've all heard me, I've often discussed, you know, the penalties for poor behavior. You know, we've had the discussion about loss of hunting privileges. We haven't really done anything with that. There's a variety. If we take trespassing as the example, you know, you've got county's attorneys, you've got wardens, you've got who does what issues. You have the issue of what's the consequence. And I believe it has to be legislative to have a different consequence than we have right now for trespassing. And then you've got hunting without permission, you know. So to me, to bite off, for example, that one issue would be good for us. And then the other side of that, the key component, I think, to the Master Hunter program that we all listen to, and I've talked to 2 recent graduates from that. They're both hunter education instructors. I think the key takeaway after they're done is really they're incentivized for more exclusive access through that program. That concerns me because that's not our function. A private entity or an NGO, that could be their function. But for us, our function is how to do the best or offer the best or create the best opportunity for the recreating hunter and the producer landowners to have a good relationship. And I realize we cannot control all that, but if we have clear consequences, and then maybe we need to think about, are there any incentives? You know, I mean, to me, the incentive is really clear. It's you get to keep hunting, and two, you get to access, as we've discussed, private lands that cooperators have enrolled in to utilize hunters as a game management tool, public hunters as a game management tool on the property. So I really think we need to work on that as a pretty big focus. Well, whether we need other people in this discussion that can throw some more creative juices into the discussion. You know, we've talked with law enforcement a bit, and we've talked with hunter education. I think we've got a lot of input, but somewhere along the line, before this goes to the next PLPW council, I think we need a clear directive as to pointing it in a direction. That'd be my first, would be that we would do that. The second is that as we've looked at this PALA option, and I hate to rehash block management too much because it's rolling, and the problems with block management are hunter behavior. You know, we have 1 million less acres enrolled in it from 11 to 18, and we're paying more for it. But the reasons for most of that is behavior or landowner changes where that historic reality just went away. I kind of hate to look at the structure if we've got other things that we need to deal with. But I think we increased the total from 12 to 15,000, what, 3 years ago? Not very long ago.
The 2017 session went from 12,000
Yeah.
to 15,000.
But now if we look at that, a landowner can, not simply, but a landowner can provide access, egress across their property. And the qualification could potentially be, or the compensation could potentially be the same as the block management maximum where they're allowing hunting on their own property. So I just question if we're creating a little problem there in those amounts being the same. And I realize there's all the variables in that, you know, the size of the block management, the opportunity, all the criteria, but they're the same. You know, there's criteria in the access agreement too. So I'm thinking we need to have a discussion about that. As Dale mentioned, there's definitely things you see in those grading sheets, scoring sheets, and the comments and the thoughts. I'm just wondering, in regards to equity, if we need to talk about that a little bit. And then the third thing would be in the PALA, to reassess those immediately after we get this first round through, from our point of view, and then also from those regional personnel points of view on what we missed, what we need to reconsider as we go forward in the next fiscal year. Those are my three.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. As I look at least your number 1 point, it looks like probably 2 legislative things that have been briefly discussed about before come to mind. One being increasing the fines. I know Ed Bukowski was big on making sure we increase the penalties or the fines for violations, you know, particularly for fish and game violations, trespass, you know, being a part of that too. But the fines therein, and the second one being almost a requirement. So I think of it like a hunter education requirement, but almost a requirement to have that hunter landowner stewardship training prior to utilizing, I think it was said before, department negotiated access. So primarily block management and how we go about requiring that. So I think those kinds of things come into play there, maybe.
Yeah, and as I looked at that 100 landowner stewardship program, either a rehashing of it or a simplification that we take over a period of time. You know, maybe it's a 3-year message that is fences and XYZ, and then you're good for 3 years. And then the next 3 years, you know, maybe you have another program that's weeds and garbage or border issues, whatever they might be. You know, I think we can go back and look at those concerns from landowners and some of the info we got from sportsmen to solidify that. So, yeah, either one.
Yeah, the course itself, should we go down that route, really needs to be overhauled. You know, if it's a combination of what Master Hunter does with what we have, or if it's a whole revisit or whatnot. I know the last meeting I mentioned, I had a chance to talk to most of all the Western State Hunter Ed administrators. They came to Montana Wild there, so I got a chance to kind of present this idea, and they were all in favor of it. They're all recognizing the fact that they're more on the education and safety piece. They're not on as much on the lands piece, but they all felt that there was a need to reemphasize that landowner relations component, even within Hunter Ed. I know, speaking personally, my wife, because of the online course for Hunter Ed, actually took her first Hunter Ed course ever. When we were in South Dakota, she didn't have to because she was over 16, but here in Montana, she has to. So she did it just because the opportunity was provided online. But that said, the course was less than what I was expecting. So on a number of fronts, but it gets the job done, but it could be improved, particularly in this area. So.
Jason, I have a question. I thought we had agreed to have U of M or somebody develop a video for that hunter behavior that was supposed to be kind of funny and kind of get people engaged on the hunter behavior part. And I submitted to you 3 or 4 questions about the MBAs, how it appeared. One of the questions was how it appeared that inside the BMAs, the PALAs seem to be extracted from the BMAs almost to get more money. In some of those, that's what it looked like. But I did submit some questions, and if tomorrow morning you answer those, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's one of the observations, I guess, between block management and the public access land agreements. If you think they go together or they don't go together, they can and can't play. They can and they cannot play well together in some situations, meaning they can if it's not access that's being already provided, but in a lot of cases, the access that we're getting through those is not new access. We're just compensating for it differently. But we can talk more about that stuff tomorrow. There's a lot of worms with those 2 programs and how they play together. So, and then as far as the video, yes, we agreed to look at trying to figure out a contracted video for 2 or 3 minutes, making it a requirement to watch online prior to buying a license. And so I think as we get rolling with our new website, as we get rolling with a new license database, that would be a component that we'd like to see added in. I'm not sure if that's a legislative action or if that's because it's basically becoming a prerequisite to purchase for online customers. So I don't know how that goes together. But I guess in my mind, if you're requiring somebody to watch something or to do something, there'd be some probably legislative directive that has to happen first. But
along that thought process, if on a case like that would be a good one to send to EQC, I think, rather than just one legislator taking on, because you'd have, if you could talk in, you'd get much more support. But getting back to Ed's point too about our first topic on penalties. And I remember in that discussion, there was the inconsistency of the justice of the peace. And so maybe there legislatively, if we just mandate a different, the penalty so it's more consistent throughout the state, I think that's something we do need to talk about, because that does cause problems down the road of people trying to pull out of block management. They don't want to deal with it.
So a quick follow-up to Denley's, if we're looking at legislative action on some of the penalties, one of the things that shocked me when I became a commissioner on how minor some of the ramifications are when you do break some of these laws. And I would sure like to see those strengthened. I think, and I don't know if don't think it's changed, but a gentleman up at Plentywood a few years ago shot like 70 birds. And I think it was a $2 penalty for everyone over the limit. That really does not stop anybody from going out there and breaking the law. The other question I would ask, if we have any data, because it's been mentioned that some of these programs maybe need to be redone. And so my question is, do we have any data on people that take some of the stewardship programs or other programs? How much less likely are they to violate some of the rules and regulations we have? You know, if it's just a minute number or percent less, that would lead to the comment that yes, we do need to do some major overhauls within the programs. If people are just taking them to say, well, we got them, now I can have this access, but a lot of them are still as likely or close to as likely to violate some of the laws. Because I know here I've seen people wearing that 100 stewardship hat, leaving gates open, driving off the roads, and those type of things. So, you know, if we have any data, that would be kind of interesting to see. I do agree with Ed. I think the trespass and hunter behavior is one of the biggest issues that would be helpful for landowners out there if we could somehow address that.
So what would that be? And maybe Ron, can you speak to existing penalties, whether they be fish and game violations and or trespass, and or what latitude, what's been tried? What do you think would work? What do you need help with from an enforcement perspective, perhaps?
I can do my best, I guess, but I was just kind of looking at what the penalty was for failed to obtain landowner permission for hunting. A first violation will be fined $135. So it doesn't have that range like a lot of things do. A lot of times misdemeanors are 50 to 500 or 50 to 1,000. But on a second offense, within 5 years, it shall not be fined not less than 500 or more than 1,000. So that second offense guy, and I think that got changed not too long ago. Might have been in 2015 where they added that second offense. So for what it's worth, that's kind of where it is.
Was my understanding from some of the wardens that whether or not that fine is actually imposed is up to the county attorney and the judge and all that, or is that incorrect?
No, that's kind of correct. I mean, by statute, that's what they're supposed to go by. But a lot of times they'll do a deferred prosecution or a whole lot of different things where it may not be what the statute actually says it's supposed to be. And then sometimes they just don't really follow the rules. And if they don't, then I mean, there's a process where you have to go to the county attorney, and then they file a motion to go back in front of the judge to make sure they're doing the right things. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. Most of the time that doesn't happen.
So my recollection with the landowners was it all varied throughout the counties they were represented by. And so then when you look at 56 counties, it's probably 10 times as worse depends what we heard from the 5. And to me, this is different. You know, I mean, if we can have a clear trespass violation for hunting, then that's a different issue, you know, and that should be clear because, I mean, the monetary thing to me should be set, but I also believe in the loss of hunting privilege. You know, maybe not on the first one, but to me, the second one shows either willful disregard by that hunter, or it's not just ignorance, you know, it's either, there's an intent there after you've been warned. And if you do it, you know, in Mineral County and then you do it over in Jefferson County, you know, the same person is creating the same problem throughout the state. So I think that's something, you know, whether we talk about it right here, I mean, we did get some of this information, but it seems to me that the trespass, hunting without permission, needs to be clarified, and we need to do something that's a little more weighty than it currently exists, and then more consistent. You know, somehow maybe there's a minimum. You know, make it simpler for the judges and the county attorneys, so it's like they're going to pay X. You know, unless they can prove they didn't do it. You know, that there was some innocent condition. So I think that was the problem, is there's no consistency. And, you know, in the county where drugs are a bigger problem than trespassing, that gets the attention, or whatever other issue. And I think we all understand that. But our perusal is the issue for recreationists violating trespass.
So there's 2 different statutes. There's a criminal trespass statute, and then there's the statute for fail to get obtain landowner permission for hunting. And so the criminal trespass, it says, they shall be fined not to exceed 500 or imprisoned in the county jail. And so those would be taking place like, and those are a little bit different. It doesn't make any difference if your land is posted or anything for hunting without landowner permission. But for a trespass, land has to be posted, or else you had to be told to leave. So there's 2 different statutes we're dealing with, and then on the hunting failed to get landowner permission, it doesn't break it down for the second one. It still says may be subject to losing your privileges. So that's the difference between the first and the second. They're both the same on the privilege loss.
And then you have corner crossings, right?
Yeah.
Which would be, that's the big ugly one in this.
Let's not make it cloudy.
Yeah, I know. So somehow I think we need to address these 2, criminal trespass and failure to ask permission. So do we have enough information? Or can we work on it between now and whenever we meet next?
We can certainly work on it together as we go forward. Go ahead.
And I agree with Representative Logie.
Jason?
I was going to say one thing. I was going to say, I would agree with Representative Logie. I think that needs to come best from the EQC, something like that, where you have a whole lot of legislators involved and get, bipartisan agreement. I think it has a better shot than just coming from one representative or one senator.
Go ahead, Carl.
On the question on the video, it was my understanding that the Hunter Ed Division was going to make a humorous video as part of a PSA. And I don't know what the status of that is, you know, instead of making it mandatory, just, you know, out among Montana's fish, wildlife, and parks, something like that. And the thing on the consistency for the violations, part of that was, you know, in your regulations, it lists basically compensation for taking a trophy animal. And that's extremely inconsistent over the state. Also, I agree with Richard on that. You know, if you get paid, if it costs you $2 for an extra bird, that's actually cheaper than going to a game farm and getting them. So, and we can discuss those tomorrow also. But I do remember that as being also as a PSA, not a mandatory. So, if we could look into that, that would be a good thing. And if we can get all the justice of the peace in Montana on the same page, we should get the Congressional Medal of Honor.
I agree.
So yeah,
That's all.
as far as the video, I don't think Wade's working on anything from our last meeting, so I'll follow up with him on that. But I think there's a need to revisit with that it's the ask first or ask for access billboard campaign we've done. I think we are going to revisit doing that again. We might call it Appreciate Access. I know that was one that Dusty Crary threw out before, or we might, just even do a simple landowner thank you. We do that currently through the Northern Ag Network and the Western Ag Reporter, but kind of making those billboards, we'll do them again, but maybe revise the message a little bit to focus on don't drive on muddy roads or that kind of hunter behavior issues that we've seen, as opposed to just a permission level access component. And we'll do that again. It'll run throughout the fall. We'll do the thank you ad again. Of course, it all comes down to dollars and cents, right? When you're talking about marketing. So just how with the Hunter Access Fund, it comes down to sometimes how much money you put into those types of efforts versus block management or whatnot projects on the ground. But it's certainly something we're going to do again. But like I said, the video I'll follow up with Wade and see what we can come up with, even if it's not mandatory. So it sounds like, from my perspective, we have kind of a couple different things relative to the fee schedule or the fine schedule for animals. Ron, is that something that's possible to look at, or is there some if we change the $5 or $2 fine to $15 fine for over limit on birds or something like that, is that practical? Does that fall in our wheelhouse?
So that would be legislative, and that's the restitution. So he could have been fined for a limit, and then that was $2 per restitution for a bird. But that's legislatively would have to be done.
Okay. So it sounds like folks want to revisit that fine schedule, at least look at what the dollar amounts are, and then if we need to adjust it between now and come up with some we can take to EQC. Is that what I'm understanding for one piece of it?
Well, consistency is maybe a more than an increased fines. Let's make them at least close across the state.
The fine should be the same. It's just what's authorized, right? So.
And we've been working, or the law enforcement division has been working with the county attorneys. They go to their annual meeting and they've been trying to push that consistency, with them, that it hurts your neighboring judge when you do something that's way less than what your neighbor does. So we've been trying to work on that, is getting those judges to do things consistently throughout the state. But it's like 60 different judges you're having to deal with, 60 different personalities, and it's, as you know, it can be a challenge.
Point.
Well,
The problem,
if the fines are higher, won't that increase the pressure on them to at least fine them rather than let them go?
Well, the problem is right now is they just use a kind of a workaround, even the $135 fine, they can do a deferred sentence or whatever and those kind of things, and where then they just don't fine them as much. So we see that with a lot of different cases, not just trespass, but it happens a lot with. What really needs to happen is, I mean, you just need to get pressure from those landowners to go in and say, you just can't, to these county attorneys or whatever, and say, hey, or the judges, and say, hey, this isn't right. And I'm kind of surprised a lot of that happens. I guess maybe it happens more than in those bigger cities or those bigger towns where the judge doesn't know the landowner. So I imagine in Blaine County, with the judges there, I imagine he takes in consideration a lot what the landowners have to say up there, but I don't know.
I would argue not. County attorney, our new one is, I think, better, but one of the past ones, depending upon who you were, he usually didn't bring charges. And on my property, one time I had a bunch of stuff stolen. They gave him a $50 fine and he was back hunting there the next day. So that's not enough, but you did hit it. It's not just the judges, it's also the county attorneys that need to be worked on.
So what's
one of the problems we're going to have if we're thinking EQC is we're really out of time. If their meeting is coming up in September, to get legislatively ready for this next session, we won't have the time to hit them up with something now.
Well, I guess I would look to drafting something and then kind of floating it back through you all prior to that. So if we know we want to get a time slot on their agenda, we would have to work independent of actual PLPW meetings. They'd be done.
Right. That would accomplish it. Otherwise if we have to wait till the next meeting, we'll run out.
Right. Yep.
Was there wisdom in separating hunting without permission, which is totally written by a warden, correct? So that's all FWP. So that can be handled that way. Is it worth us? I don't understand why there's so much difference here, but taking it from that approach versus from the legal approach with the counties, or do both and see which one we get, because to me it sounds like there's a commission issue or a issue with wardens being able to get their fines through, issued for failure to ask for permission while hunting, and then trespass. Should we differentiate that and have two different approaches? Try them both and hope to get one? I mean, I'm just asking the question because to me, they seem to be a little bit different deal. And again, I would put in, the first, if somebody's failing to ask permission versus getting fined for trespass, it could be entirely different things. Failure to ask permission during a hunting season while you're hunting, clearly an FWP issue to resolve with the landowner. So would we be more successful to approach that separately from trespass or not?
Well, I think they're separate issues. So I think those would, if you want to increase the fines for hunting without landowner permission, you'd have to do that through that statute. So they're two completely different statutes that you're working with.
Right.
And then the game wardens, game wardens and the county sheriffs, those folks can both do hunting without landowner permission. And we can do trespass, less.
Sort of,
yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah, and that's, yeah. So like if it's during, there's some different legal opinions on whether or not we can do trespass.
So why don't we just do hunting without permission? If it's a big enough deal, the county can handle the trespass. And then again, we can include, certainly not on a first citation, but a second or subsequent loss of hunting privilege.
besides a fine.
I think, Ed, I think that approach would be good because it simplifies. We just deal with the one problem that's dealing with the hunters, and criminal trespass is its own thing any other time, no matter where you are. But I think for our responsibility at PLPW, I think that would be great to put it right on the hunting trespass.
What do you think?
I would agree with Denley. I think we do the side that we have some authority on. And I know the Lost River Ranch up here, for example, people came in, if they didn't have their guns out, they argued they weren't hunting. So the game warden couldn't write them a ticket, and then they had to call the sheriff. But I think we do that side now. And I think Denley probably thinks we have a better chance of getting that through than if we try to broach the other side.
Yeah, because our thing is behavior, what it's creating for any type of agreement or relationship. You know, if they steal your stuff, that's the county that should go get your restitution. You know, so far they haven't stolen any game, they stole access to the landowner.
Just so
how much of a problem is this statewide?
Well, my only answer to that is from what we heard from the landowners, and I did look back at those meeting minutes, and that was a #1 issue. Some of it did involve those other sections we talked about.
I'll go take a look. I can have someone run how many hunting without landowner permission citations we wrote last year. I can go do that here.
You know, we write citations, but there's a lot that are not turned in, and it just ticks the landowner off. I probably have a half a dozen here a year that I don't turn in unless they get nasty. Then I call the game warden, which I have on a more regular basis, especially with the 7 license plates, you know, and even told the one guy that 95% of my problems come from 7 license plates. And he laughed at me and said, yeah, I can see that. So that's when I called the game warden.
Well, that should be easy for you to fix.
I don't think they'll allow me to just keep all the 7 license plates off of block management.
it's a new rule.
I thought it used to be #2 license that got in the most trouble.
It was, but it kind of changed now.
Jason, remind me, do we have some survey information, some information back from landowners that rank, you know, the issues they have, the issues that they struggle with relative to access and hunter, and where hunter behavior sits in that ranking? We hear directly from the landowners. I think I remember Mike Lewis having some of that information, but maybe I'm not recalling.
Yeah, we do. It'd be more specific to block management landowners. So we just got done doing a survey last season with block management landowners, as well as 5,000 just general hunters, more from a block management evaluation piece as opposed to, you know, problems therein. The #1 issue far and away with any loss of block management in the state is generational change or new landowner transactions. That's been seen in multiple surveys and in this last one too. Hunter behavior, you know, it actually didn't show up as much as other probably FWP issues related to why somebody would or would not enroll in block management. Typically, the story we hear from landowners is that when you put those green signs up, the hunter behavior improves because we are seeing more people watching and more people watching the landscape. So I think we're kind of talking about those landowners who aren't enrolled. I mean, there is some truth to those that are, but it's almost more of those that aren't enrolled that are having issues with people not knowing where they're at. I think you're right in the sense we need to focus on the things we can control. You know, if it's the hunting without permission, and if it's a standard loss of privilege or a standard fine that could be assessed, I think that makes it probably more simple than trying to range a value or whatnot. But that is the citation that somebody would be issued to on a block management area for violation of rules. It'd be basically hunting without landowner permission. So if you show up and drive down the road that the block management map says is closed because you see it open on your Onyx maps and you go anyway, then it's really kind of up to the landowner what they want to do with it. But that would be considered hunting without landowner permission as well. So it sounds like, from my perspective at least, to revisit that hunting without landowner permission piece, and then perhaps the restitution therein, whether it be the loss of privileges or mandatory loss of privileges on a second offense, the fine amounts, and then also perhaps looking at from a general restitution list or fine fee list, what that comes out to be on a per animal basis beyond kind of trophy. Is that the two areas I see out of this discussion that we want to try and at least look at here in the short term?
I would say yes.
Okay. Just so I knew what to pull and what to bring before you, and also our folks on what we need to do to get that accomplished, and how that aligns with other enforcement initiatives and that kind of stuff as we go into the next session. But I'll do that. We'll plan to have something for the EQC meeting if it doesn't if something doesn't need to be done, then we'll just bypass that topic. But if you guys see areas or places where you want to see changes, we'll make sure we get that in time for EQC on that September 9 and 10 meeting. Because I don't want to leave Representative Logie out to dry on this one, and I think there'd be enough consensus amongst legislators and also the other NGO groups for something standardized if it needs to be done. So.
And if you do get that on the agenda, provided I have the day open, I would actually go up and speak, and maybe Ed could too, to the fact that we had landowners that was their concern, and we can express that to EQC that this was landowner driven.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Just looking on my notes. So is there anything relative to hunter behavior as far as requiring or mandating that needs to be addressed? I know, like I said, we'll go through and do the billboard campaign. We'll do the work with ComEd to try and get some video, a humorous video, not just something standard, but typical stuff like we talked about last time to put together. But is there anything? I know, like I said before, there'd been a discussion about a requirement for some education material into Commissioner Stuker's question about data. Really, the only people we're seeing take that hunter landowner stewardship course are people that are coming through the One Montana Master Hunter course. So all the Master Hunter students have to take it as a part of their curriculum, which equates to about 100 a year or so. I think in the course's history, we've maybe seen 700 people take that course. So to say that anything is correlated to hunter behavior as a result of that course is too far to stretch, but there may be some components there if you were to make it mandatory.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there's only 700 that have taken that over the years. That being the case, then there's really nothing there.
Right.
So I still would like to see us do that at some point, Jason, where we develop a program that you take access, block management, or other agreed access means. But as we're talking here, we've talked about this video thought and a long video. And how do you do that to require a license? So that means you have to change legislation, what if we did, what if we did a 1 minute? So in my world, a 1 minute video is it. You look, you guys get on, you see all these ads and everybody skips ads. But what if to get on my FWP, we either had a 30-second or 1 minute PSA that just played before you could go to wherever you're going. If you're checking your drawing success or whatever it is you're checking on my FWP, what if we created a series of those and we dealt with gates, weeds, boundaries? The other things that they talked about was they want safe shooters and they want efficient, I mean, and that's what we want, efficient hunters. What if we did a 30-second to 1 minute fun production? And if you guys could cue it on my FWP, oh, the last one was just simply respect for the landowner. That's what all those are about. But what if we did that where you go on my FWP and it plays that as soon as you click your little, pick the rabbit and you click on and it goes to the next spot. It's that little segment, make them really brief and entertaining but informational. And that's it. And then they rotate. So you'd have to get on it 2, 4, 6, 8 times in a year to hear all the messages maybe. Then nothing's required other than it could be annoying to some. But if you do it well, they'll watch it. That's a simple thing that doesn't require anything other than us to figure out the right message. And I know, you know, you got to run about half an hour to, or yeah, 30 minutes to get a good 1 minute or 30-second. Boom, this is great. So that's okay.
Yeah.
What about that?
I guess I don't know why we can't, but I don't know why we can either. I guess I think it's possible. You know what I mean? As far as our own internal systems and how that's set up and requirements, I think it's possible. What that looks like in a new system, I have no idea, but it's certainly possible to add it. I think, I guess, I know there's been interest in the past from the director's office to even support these kinds of initiatives also. So, you know, where the money comes from is always the big question, but I think it's possible.
Yeah,
Ron?
Jason, let's make sure to ask Greg his thoughts on that, Greg Lemon.
Yep.
No doubt he could help us better understand what is or isn't in the, you know, between here and there, Ed.
Yeah.
Yep. For sure.
The question I would have there, Ed, are you talking just when you go online or on any phone calls into the office? Because sometimes during the busy licensing area or time, another 30 seconds might really put some additional strain on the department, although I do like the idea.
Well, since you bring that up, Commissioner Stuker, if you're going to be on hold, you may as well listen to a message.
Might as well listen to a message rather than music. I agree.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Ron, did you have an update on the hunting without landowner permission?
So we cited 321 people, well, 321 citations, and 4 of those were second offense.
How about trespass?
I didn't check trespass, but I sure could.
What are people cited for the most in the hunting season?
That would be going to be hunting without landowner permission.
There you go.
That
So,
answered a lot of the questions.
Yep. So Ron, while you were gone, we talked about bringing those 2 things together, putting them together at least for a look over PLPW as far as the hunting without landowner permission restitution and or mandatory loss of privileges for a second offense. And then also looking at the fee schedule or the fine schedule for other violations within fish and game purview. I don't think there's, again, it was just to pull those statutes, look at them, see if anything needs to change. If it does, try and get it on the EQC calendar with some tentative language. And Representative Logie said he may be able to represent should it go forward or need to be presented on behalf of the group and landowners.
I can throw something together on the adding the mandatory loss of privileges on a second offense. That'd be pretty simple to do.
Okay. Looking back on my notes or my list, so I did put together a whole big long list of things. One of them was from Commissioner Stuker about changing the commission authority back for 454s. So previously, commission would review those and discuss those and have a recommendation or basically a final to the agency on whether or not to do agreements. In the 2017 session with some changes, there was kind of I'd say an oversight on that part to which eliminated commission authority and then made the responsibility of the department. So are folks wanting to see that added back to the way it was as from a commission standpoint?
I think that was 2019 that was changed, Jason, not 17.
It was changed in 19, but that oversight actually came originally in the 17 version of the bill as well. So we just kept that language over and it ended up happening to pass in 19 with the change that was proposed. So.
Yeah, the intent wasn't to leave out the commission. It just was an oversight.
Yeah, because everybody, I talked to Denley and other people in the EQC, and I also talked to, was it Zach Brown, I believe, from the initially proposed that in 17. And he was rather upset over that being in there because he said that was not the intent. So, like I say, I'm probably not very long for the commission, but I defend their authority very strongly and hate to see it being eroded. Of course, if that's what the legislators want, we live with that. But everybody says it was an oversight, so I would really like to see it put back.
The group in relative consensus with that? Okay. That's a pretty easy fix, I think, at least to draft that language.
There is, it might be more of a fix than you think, Jason, because right now, and Ron, you can correct me here if I'm wrong, under the current statutes, and I think this is where some of the things came in, the department gives out permits and or licenses, and the commission gives out permits or can approve those. And that's where part of the problem came when this bill went through. There was no split there or sharing of duty. And so they just went to the department, is what I was told. So I'm just throwing that out when you're looking at putting something in to change that back, that it can be addressed. Now, I've been told by Senator Lang and others that can be fixed through the legislation. So.
Are you speaking to the permit and a license or that combination piece?
That was what I was told. The commission did not have authority for one of those to issue. And when you combined them, that threw a monkey wrench in. So they just wrote the commission out rather than working on some language that would share responsibilities in regards to the 454s with that legislation. Who's the main writer over there? Hope? Is it Hope or? I can't remember her name now. I apologize.
Yeah, Hope, I'm sure Hope Hope had that, I believe.
Yeah, and I think she's the one that was explaining that to me when I talked to her.
Well, it's technically 4 o'clock, which would be our public comment time. We don't have any people that are attending from the public, so we'll just keep rolling if that's okay with folks.
Let it roll.
Okay. So I'll try and share my screen here like Quentin did earlier and see if it works. So here's, can you guys see a Word document that has some legislative changes discussed at earlier meetings, not prioritized on it? Can you folks see that?
Yes.
So we talked about the fine amounts, so that one's taken care of. One of the topics we talked about briefly at a previous meeting was this landowner preference thing. So one, used by elk or the acreage amounts or some language in the elk preference talking about the option to purchase. So we've got people that are taking advantage of the landowner preference from that piece or that angle as well. The note I had for before was that you briefly discussed it, but did not pursue further. Is that still the case?
I thought there was a new description that came about that made it more defined on instead of just used by elk. It seemed to me there was a new description that was defined. Anybody remember that?
Yeah, Ron can probably clarify this, but my understanding is now anyone within that hunting district is eligible for landowner preference, whether or not they have elk on their property. And some of the people that are actually standing the damage now are having lesser odds of getting a license. Because it used to be, it had to be used by elk. And about 4 years ago, I think it was, the department went in and just said anybody within the hunting district.
And it's the 640 acres is what qualified.
Correct. You have to have 640 acres, but if you have that in the hunting district, whether or not you have elk, you are now eligible for landowner preference for an elk tag.
I thought it had something to do with resident populations of elk, no?
I don't think so. Wasn't there a problem with people around Wheat, Montana, where they'd sectioned it out in little parcels and they were going to get preferential treatment?
That's the 640 section. Maybe
Yeah.
And I want to argue the other side too, because there are some 300-acre pieces that have way more damage than a 640 that have no damage and have, an elk maybe walks across it once during season. But I know it seemed like before in the discussion, people wanted to just kind of let it lay for a while. But it is important when Western Montana, the smaller parcels are getting a lot of elk damage.
And I don't know if there's a way, and I'm agreeing with Denley here. If there's a way to write some language in there that would qualify some of those individuals for landowner preference based on the FWP's biologists observing how many elk are there, and if they are getting elk damage every year, somehow be able to include it. And I have no elk up here in my place, so I can make these statements.
Well, was the origination of landowner preference to mitigate damage or reward process? I don't know the origination of that.
When I talk to some of the landowners in the Highwoods and other places that have been there a long time, they felt it was a tool to help offset damages. That's their original, what they originally thought it was. Whether that was the case or not, I don't know, but that was the feeling of a number of the landowners. And still today, they say, you know, we're standing the damages, but my neighbor out there who has no elk that ever cross his place, he has as much chance to get a landowner preference tag if he owns 640 acres, which most people do down there, as I do. And they don't think that's right.
Why don't we eliminate the landowner preference for bulls and give them a cow permit every year? Let them get in the drawing with everybody else that's applying for that area.
The other side of that, and I don't want to cause an argument, is Montana is one of the few states that don't pay for landowner damage from wildlife. That's why some of these programs, I believe, were put in place to try to keep landowners from mobilizing together and going to the legislators and asking for damages. You know, and I think that's why some of these programs were put in place.
Yeah, I feel it was to pacify the landowner, you know, like for the 50 I had in my field for about a month and a half this spring, if I can get a cow tag out of that, I at least am not quite as upset, but I don't qualify because I'm about 80 acres short of 640 in that block.
So Jason, maybe we should look at the information again at a subsequent meeting and see the detail of it and make a decision at that point, because I don't remember all of it.
So,
yeah. Go ahead, Rick.
A quick question, is the 640 in statute or is that a commission rule?
It's a good question.
I believe the 640 is statute for elk preference. Ron, is that correct?
I believe so. I can look it up here too, but I'm pretty sure it's statutory.
Yeah, I believe the 640 is statutory. So, you know, there's something to be said perhaps about involving a history of game damage complaints or something like that, where you could do the 640 as the standard and then add in you know, should damage be occurring as documented per game damage complaints, which means it'd have to have some level of open public access. You could also look at, you know, maybe subject to lesser amounts or something like we do for the 454 elk management piece. There's an elk management piece in there too, where it says, at least an arm, that it has to be a minimum of 2,500 acres. Or there's some language about, you know, if elk management can be successful at less than 2,500 acres, the department may look at doing those kinds of agreements too. So there's something to be said perhaps about adding language to the 640 that would allow for example, Denley's situation.
The other question I might ask there is, if we're looking at language and possibilities of getting something through, could a couple of landowners go together to meet the 640 and every other year, say there was two, one of them would be eligible for the preference and the other wouldn't? That would, as long as there was some type of an agreement.
Yeah, I'm sure that's possible as well. Becomes a lot more sticky. But
I like the original idea of similar to the 454. If the department feels it's necessary or would meet the criteria less than 640, they should be eligible.
okay.
And just so you know, I wouldn't want to carry that because I get pointed at.
We would point at you.
Conflict of interest.
Understood.
But I could find somebody, I'm sure.
Okay. Again, these will just be proposals that'll come to you guys probably in a Word document with some track changes on what the language is and then how it may be modified and then what you think of it. And we'll probably have to, I don't know, when the deadline for the EQC agenda list is, but I suppose probably the end of August, so. Moving on to the next topic, there was discussion, I think at a couple of meetings, about the bonus points starting before you can legally obtain a license. So there's I don't know how many, probably not a lot, but there are some people who've figured out that system where as soon as your child is able to get an ALS number, which is basically age 1 or anything before, you can start buying bonus points, even though they're legally not able to obtain a license. Is that something you guys want to still explore?
I think we should, because otherwise they're gaming the system.
I agree.
Yeah, that was changed in 17 to the current system. I have no idea who carried that one.
I know we had talked about that for like once in a lifetime for moose, sheep, and goat and that kind of stuff, trying to set an age 18 on that piece of it that didn't go through, but this one, I'm not sure if it's been looked at really. Ron, did you figure out landowner preference?
Yeah, it's 640 acres. It's statutory.
Okay.
87,705.
Okay. Moving on to another controversial topic, and this one may be not something you want to spend your time on, but was to change wolf classifications from game animal to predator and or add a wolf license to each base hunting license sold. Is anything anybody wants to take an effort to look at this time?
I think we had a discussion about how the wolf license cost had gone down anyway.
Yeah, that was a last session result. I think they cut the price of the wolf license.
So here's a question. Some states allow with your license to shoot, like Idaho, for example. If you have an elk license and you want to shoot a wolf, you can use the elk license on that. Or other states, I understand that I think the moose is, or bear is one of the, grizzly bear, one of the top, which I don't think there's any grizzly bear licenses. But if you had one of those licenses, you could shoot anything under that. And they tell me in Idaho, there are a lot of elk tags used on wolves. Now, I'm not recommending that. I'm just throwing that out.
Do we have an overabundance of wolves in Montana?
We do in Mineral County, but I would say that I'm not sure, but I think there might be a someone on the side bringing a proposal like this. I don't know for sure, but I heard a little discussion, so it may come from someone else anyway. But it's a pretty controversial one.
At the commission, the three biggest items we hear: wolves, elk, and right now the Madison.
So is there any interest to work on either the classification, which we all know will be a big blow up from both sides, and then also some kind of wolf license, or just leave as is for now?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, let it go. We have bigger things to worry about.
So the next bullet is one I threw in, and it was one that happened to us this year. Actually, it was in the tax code, there's language that says you can't qualify for an unlocking public lands tax credit if you're allowing public access, basically from, if you think about it, from a public section across private to another public section. So what's happened is we had some of those where they were, coming off of a county road, accessing a public section. There'd be a gap of private. The landowner would allow the private access from public to public, but they don't qualify based on the tax code. So we actually lost, I think, 5 agreements this year in the Unlocking Public Lands Tax Credit Program, because they were doing that. They were allowing public access across their private land, but it was from one existing public parcel to another public parcel, not from a county road to one parcel, period. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you, but that's what was happening. And so there's language that's in the tax code that doesn't jive with what's in our Unlocking Public Lands Tax Program. So as a result, the general fund will maintain their tax credits and the recreational users will lose their access. But that's just one simple thing I thought to bring before this group we may be able to change.
So why wouldn't they just apply for a PALA?
Well, that's the other piece of it, right? Is now there's a new program that may incentivize them differently, depending on what they're allowing access to. So some of the landowners who are in the tax credit program wanted to see a tax credit rather than a payment, but they may not see it that way if there's a lot of money going to a isolated parcel or whatnot. But that could be another option, Ed. That's correct.
Well, we talked about that as being a possible adverse effect, and I think that's where we set our base, because it compensates for the fact that they would pay taxes on the payment, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
I think as a landowner that any program that might enhance access, we should try to accomplish. And whether these people will go to PAL, we only have so much money over there also. And we got an awful lot of applications, some that did not qualify. Some of them might fit into this if we get the tax code changed.
Yeah, what's the harm in it, really?
So Jason, how many total of those agreements are there, and you lost 5?
Well, we had 15 total as of last year. One landowner sold, so we lost 4 from that landowner. But then an existing landowner would like to maintain or stay in the program. Actually, 2 of them. And one landowner had 1 application of their 3 denied because of this tax code, and the other one had all 4 of their parcels dropped because of the tax code. So there's currently 5 tax credits in the state. There would have been 10.
How much land did it open up? Those additional 5 we lost.
Probably 3,000 acres or something like that. Not a big chunk, but some.
Depending upon what the habitat is and what's there, 3,000 is quite a bit. If it's up in my country, 3,000 isn't a lot.
Yeah, they were all in that country up by Malta, I think. So. I'll put something together again and run it past you guys. And if it's thumbs down, we'll forget about it. If it's thumbs up, we'll pursue it.
Good.
The next one, or a couple, we can talk about tomorrow, but it's basically how we maintain BMA and PALA working together. Either you're looking at paying BMA landowners more, which would be that next daily payment cap to be competitive with PALA. So right now, like we talked about before, landowners and PALA will get up to 15,000 per agreement, whereas block management landowners will get up to 15,000 total. So there's a piece there we can talk about maybe for future looks, but realistically, there's two things happening there. One is that the landowner in block management, no matter how much land or wherever it's at in the state, can get the total of 15,000, whereas any landowner in the state, wherever you're at, no matter how many parcels you're opening, you could get up to 15,000 per agreement. So you'll see in the list of ones for tomorrow, I think one landowner is standing to look about $26,000 should those agreements go forward, which is more than anyone in the whole state who would allow block management, even at open on-demand use, high demand use. On that note, it sounds like Southern Pine Plantation, formerly Weyerhaeuser lands in Region 1 and 2, are going to stay in block management, so that's good. 660,000 acres, they're going to stay open for this fall, but they are going to take a payment. So similarly, they're capped at $15,000 total for their 660,000 acres. Whereas if they were to do PALAs, we'd probably break the bank. But, so that's a piece there. And that's kind of where the next ones come into play, is like, what is it about the public lands access piece that we need to either revisit, either through block management, such as incentivizing BMA landowners who are already allowing the public access. We kind of talked about that before, to public lands. You know, it's all kind of how the two play together, I guess, is kind of how I would say it. And I don't know exactly. I think maybe tomorrow after our discussion and you guys' better understanding of all the projects we're looking at, we might have some resolutions there. So I guess I won't close the book on legislative issues per se, but just know that the cap for both of those, whether it be per agreement or per landowner, are statutory. So. One of the things that Carl had mentioned before was a in-kind donation in lieu of payment. So landowners could take it as a tax deduction for allowing public access rather than having to pay income tax on it. I'm sure that's probably a tax code thing too, but it was just on the list from before. I wanted to make sure that if we wanted to explore it, we can explore it. Looks like yes. Okay.
I like the idea of a tax credit.
Okay. We'll look and see what all that spider web is, and how it may or may not go together. I think, again, it'd have to be probably a general income tax credit. So your state general fund would be the place that it would see the hit if there's a tax credit. But there may be some way to look at, like we do with conservation easements, where it's kind of a federal tax deduction, or I don't know how that's set up, but we can look into that.
Yeah, otherwise you could mess up the counties if it turns out to be a tax break on private property or personal property. So you got to avoid that.
Yeah, and it may, maybe it's not as much too. Right now we have, max cooperators who are at the $15,000 cap, and maybe you put a $5,000 tax credit or something like that, as opposed to the 15 or whatever. There's options there perhaps, but just wanted to bring it up since it was on the list from before. Do do you all want to address a block management cap specifically, or hold that discussion for how the two play together tomorrow?
I think we need to wait and see how this all comes together tomorrow, I mean, I don't think we'll even get that far on it tomorrow. I think it's going to be the October meeting or beyond when we can really wrap our hands around. That's a big item, but certainly want to hear from the regions. And then as we work through these tomorrow, I think that will shed light on how big of an issue this is or potentially could be.
Okay. So we talked about already the hunter lander stewardship course, or some kind of way to mandate private land hunting, or negotiated department access hunting. How hard would you guys like to push that? Do you think it's essential? Think it's helpful? Do you think it's not worth your time at this point? What would you like to see? Like I said, in my mind, it goes back to our hunter education mandate, right? We have a mandate that you have to take that for certain ages. So that's about how
I kind of like Ed's idea that every time a person goes in the FWP, there's just a little blurb and they rotate, but you would get an education there on landowners and being a good hunter etiquette. I think that's the right place to have it, and they'd get it every time, no matter what.
Yeah, otherwise who's going to enforce it? I mean, if someone goes to sign up at a block management, landowner gonna say, show me permission or show me evidence that you took the stewardship course. I really like the idea that both Denley and Ed brought up to just have that when you link into My Fish, Wildlife and Parks, it's there, and I guess you can choose not to pay attention, but for that 1 minute max, I think people would look at it and hopefully it would have a beneficial impact. But I don't know, to make it a requirement for hunting on BMAs, I see that as a tough one.
I'd like to chime in here.
Go ahead,
Carl.
If only 700 people have taken that since that thing existed, why are we even wasting our time on it?
Good point.
We can do something better somewhere else.
Yeah, we haven't pushed it. We haven't advertised it real heavy, in part because of the quality that it is. But yeah, there wasn't, and there's no mandate to take it, right? So it's just kind of a fun educational item.
Well, as Rick,
and I'm just saying, pure numbers. Let that ship sink.
as Richard mentioned, he's seen people wearing the hat. But that's the reward for taking is you get the hat. I think to have a quick quote unquote PSA that everybody gets to see is great. And I think that could do it. I do think that an enhanced hunter education program, it's going to come sooner or later, because you got a bunch of people moving to this state right now. They're buying property sight unseen, and they're going to come here and love Montana to death. So you're going to have a whole new crop of problems. And at some point in time, either FWP will offer a program that's enhanced from standard hunter ed that's based on a 12-year-old to a educational program that's based on efficient hunting with respect for the opportunity on private land. Because you can buy your tag and you go hunt public land all day long if you can get to it. I just think they're two different issues, and the One Montana Master Hunter program they told us their goals. You know, their goals are never to get anywhere near the 8,000, 9,000 people that go through hunter education every year in Montana. Their goals are 300, I think is what he said. So at some point, somebody's got to look at doing a better job of addressing the opportunities on private property. And that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
If you want, and if you want a little humor in those, and I'll volunteer, I got 2 cows. You open a gate from a quarter mile, they see it open, then they come running. You could put that on a PS.
Totally do that. Okay, what we'll do, Danley, is you'll open the gate. I'll be standing there by the gate, answering the call of nature as the cattle run out. What do you think?
That'd work. Yeah, that'd get people's attention.
What happened? Where'd they go? Give me a rope.
Right. All right. And the last one we talked about before was this help for landowners concept, or it doesn't sound like the agency's going to be bringing anything forward for, I guess I haven't, heard a final, but as far as keeping technicians on longer or helping them to facilitate more access programs, I guess I would say it doesn't sound like the agency is going to be bringing anything in that regard. So I'm not sure if this last bullet's really for me to talk about so much as it's a need that we've got. Got some places where technicians don't even start till October and then they're off by December. So it's just an opportunity if we're looking at the help for landowners and more eyes on the landscape, what that looks like. Maybe Ron can speak to that. He's probably had more discussions on that front.
I haven't had any discussions on that front.
Okay.
So Jason.
Yes,
we're
sir.
gonna be talking about the PAL and the block management tomorrow. You mentioned the cap a couple of times. I've received some calls over the years, and it opens a can of worms, but it might also open some access if in those areas where elk numbers or hunting districts are X amount over, and we'd have to come up. If you're in block management, we could go to 25,000 versus 15,000 to see if that would open up any additional land. I mean, takes legislative action, but I just wanted to throw that out tonight so the council members could think about it. And I don't know how much additional land it would open, but I've had that brought up to me a number of times. Actually, in the past, some council members have brought that up in regards to quality of hunt and what's available in some of these areas. I do not want to get into paying for damages. I would rather pay for access in some fashion. And if we could get some of those lands open, that would also help then towards elk management. Again, I don't know how, when you can go out and have an outfitter come in and get 15, 20, 30,000 for one large elk, whether that would make any difference. But I do think it's something we should have discussion on.
Yeah, I know not only existing landowners are providing that. So I think if there's some a group of landowners over by Whitehall that are maxed out on their contracts for block management at 15,000, but there's still another $15,000 or $20,000 worth of 100-day impacts they're not being compensated for. So we say it's a $13 per hunter day, unless you're those landowners who are allowing so many hunter days where you're not being compensated anymore. It now becomes a $4 hunter day or $3 hunter day because you've got so many impacts. And we've got $500,000 right now of unpaid 100-day impacts, if you think about it that way. Or you could say we're paying it, but we're just paying it at a reduced rate. So there's a lot of stuff, even with existing cooperators who are allowing that by the good graces of their heart to allow that public access, that are not being compensated the same way as someone else. So it's kind of the same, it's the same question, you know, if it's a bigger landowner with the elk problem, certainly it's the same problem with 100 days, but we have that right now. We've got landowners across the state who are at the cap, particularly in Southwest Montana, with their uses through the roof. But anyway, so that's an issue that's out there as well. Anything else for the good of the order before we wrap up for today?
Go out and look at the comet in the morning or tonight. It's worth seeing. 4 degrees in the northwest sky.
Certainly it's got to be sitting on the computer for 3.5 hours talking to each other, right?
I won't argue that with you.
Well, thank you guys so very much for your time. Sorry, this has got to be the business we do business in, but tomorrow we'll talk about the public access land agreements. I'll have at least 4 of the 6 regional access coordinators I know are planning on participating. If you have other, finer detail questions or whatnot, the lady from Missoula who handles our Region 1 and Region 2 block management stuff, she's going to be on the call, but they didn't have any in that far west Montana, so she wasn't going to probably be participating as much as the other ones. Yeah, I think getting those concerns that you have or questions that you have brought to light this is the opportunity to do it, so we know how to modify and do better as we go forward. But there's some really good projects in there, and there's also some projects that kind of raise your eyebrows a little bit and say, well, what do we do here? And that's, I guess, why we look to your recommendation. At the end of the day, it will be the department's decision, I guess, to do what Director Williams wants to do, but I don't see her going any opposite direction as what you guys would do. So that's pretty much tomorrow all day. It's the same link, same telephone number. We'll start at 8:30. So if you want to try and get in about 8:15 or 8:20, just to make sure all your stuff's working, we'll do the same format as today. It'll be a lot more screen sharing, just so we can roll through each of the projects. I tried to overnight some documents to you. Hopefully they got to you. If not, check your mailbox. I know mine came today. So we're trying to get it best we can. It came down to almost days and hours, actually. We had original May 29th deadline for applications. We had maybe 10 at that time. We extended it 2 weeks, which then put everything else back 2 weeks. And it was actually up until last week, Thursday and Friday, when I finally got the opportunity to meet with our legal staff and to meet with the director's office. And so that's why it took so long to get to you what you have. I apologize for not being able to give you more time on it, but trying to hold out for as long as we can with even getting stuff for landowners. There's a couple applications on the almost ineligible list. I hate to not even discuss a guy who didn't send in his $5, but that's where we're at, right? So there's some of them that are like, well, they're good projects, let's talk about them, but you didn't complete the application process. And that's statutory, is the $5 application fee. So maybe there's something else there that we look at that will help us out the next round. But thank you guys for your time. Thank you for your attentiveness over the last, like I said, 3.5 hours or 3 hours and 45 minutes, something like that. It's not been easy, but we'll make it through, and appreciate all you guys do.
Well, thanks, Jason.
I was impressed with the packet. I think you guys did very well in the time you had, and I apologize for being a little bit late today. I was out. I had to finish cutting the field before I quit.
Are you into UPS overnight donuts and coffee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really, I thought you were chasing some cows that got out.
No, I didn't have any hunters leaving the gate open today.
If you guys notice, Dustin Roy too, you guys met him at the last PLPW meeting here in town. He's kind of a fisheries counterpart. He's going to be with us tomorrow as well to work through any of the fisheries questions. Some of them are opening up some water bodies or water access. So Dustin, did you have anything?
No, I just figured I'd show my face at the end of the day. I've been patiently listening all day. It's been good conversation. So looking forward to tomorrow, talking about a couple of the pallet projects. I have some fisheries components, so should be some good stuff.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all so much for your time, and have a good evening, and we'll catch up with you in the morning.
See you
See you
guys
tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.